want to start by talking about a psychological mechanism that turns good people, church-going and non-church-going people alike, into people who ignore women who say that they've been abused. They're not bad people. They're not monsters, just regular people who love their families, follow the commandments, cry during testimony meetings. This psychological mechanism that I just want to open up the show today with. This doesn't happen all at once. So there's a psychologist named Albert Bandura who spent his career studying a simple question: how do decent people participate in harm without seeing themselves as harmful? He called it moral disengagement, which sounds like something that you'd announce as you exit a bathroom at a dinner party just before leaving early, but it's actually much worse than that. It doesn't start with defending something obviously evil. It starts with defending someone that you admire, someone who talks like you and believes like you and fights the enemies that you already distrust. Somebody says, a man you admire may have done something very wrong with some women, and your brain, your own brain, which is yours, does something strange. It says, no, not because you've examined the evidence, but because examining the evidence would be uncomfortable. You've got a lot going on, so you disengage the landing gear to Empathy Island. So instead you think these accusations are probably an attack, then women sometimes lie, then the timing is suspicious. Then, if you're Mormon like I was for 30 years, you think this is exactly what happened to Joseph Smith, which is quite a leap, but your brain is already really committed at this point. Each time you skip over that small nagging feeling, that little voice that says, your brain is quietly moving the goalposts. That what once would have horrified you now seems like a reasonable position that reasonable people could hold, such as yourself, who is reasonable. You didn't decide to become somebody who brushes sexual assault under the rug. You just arrived there. So Bandura found that when group identity is threatened, humans will justify almost anything to protect it, which, if you think about it, least surprising fact of all of science, but also very terrifying. The moment, though, that changed things for a lot of LDS people wasn't the allegations of assault at the hands of Tim Ballard. It wasn't the women coming forward with evidence highlighted all across Utah news. It wasn't any of the things that, if you heard them about a stranger, would make you say, man, that guy should be in prison. The moment that changed things for a lot of LDS members was when Tim Ballard said something critical about the church. And comments started to appear like, I didn't believe the women until he turned on the brethren. Which, if you read that back slowly, means I was fine with the assaults. It was the ecclesiastical criticism that crossed the line. No, I don't want to overstep. That is some people, not all of them. But it is a remarkable thing to accidentally admit. So what recent comments from Mormons reveal, without meaning to, which is the most honest kind of revelation, is the actual hierarchy of values at work. That women being harmed, categorize manageable. Institutional authority being questioned, unforgivable. Because the patriarchy, as it turns out, doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs enough people to demonstrate through their own behavior that protecting powerful men matters more than believing women. Now, let me say that again, because I know I use the scary P word. The patriarchy doesn't need to announce itself. It just needs enough people to demonstrate through their own behavior that protecting powerful men matters more than believing women. Now, Utah, where I live and raise my kids. Utah, you have a choice that communities don't always get. Sometimes Jeffrey Epstein operates for decades because nobody with power wanted to look, because looking would cost something, because the women involved were easy to dismiss, and the man involved was useful, and the whole machine just keeps running because it's more convenient than stopping. People within the sound of my voice, you are not in that position. You can see what is in front of you. The question that Bandura was really asking under all of the academic language and moral disengagement and identity protection and all the rest of it was simply this. When you know, what do you do? Because now you do know. The women told you, multiple women with details over time at great personal cost, because women who come forward against admired men in this society tend not to have a lovely time of it. And the response from a significant portion of the LDS population was, yes, but did Tim Ballard say anything bad about the prophet? Then I'll pay attention. So I can't do this episode without calling that out at the very beginning. I want members of the LDS Church to watch this episode. I want us all to kumbaya over being defrauded on something. But if someone told you that a man was using spiritual language to manipulate and assault women, and you would have said, well, that's a monster, root him out. I don't want him anywhere near me. That's not what we stand for. But if at some point he was your monster, your hero, your symbol, your proof that the gospel was winning, and somewhere in that process, all of that stopped being real, we need to understand discernment and wind back the clock a little bit about how this person was allowed to be a predator in the first place. Discernment now, when Tim Ballard's legacy will be what I think is millions of people accidentally taking a values test that they didn't know that they were taking. And the answer that they handed in was, we care more about what happens to a church and its reputation than what happens to women, which is an interesting position, obviously, for people who follow religion that at its very core cares about what happens to people. I hope that's the kind of Mormon I was, specifically vulnerable ones. So the women said, we were assaulted, and so many people's answer was yes, but is the institution embarrassed? Not the same category of problems. So credit to every Latter-day Saint who jumped ship out of the Tim Ballard camp, but that is not enough. I'm glad that you see the fraud now, but that is not enough. I love, personally, so many aspects of the LDS Church, and this can't just be a saga about a group of people discovering under pressure what they believe, not what they say they believe at the pulpit or post about General Conference or the values that they list when they're explaining to their daughters why the church is true. We're finding out what members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually believe. Is it protect the reputation of an institution run by men because it's worth more than the bodies of women harmed by one? That's just kind of what the comments have said out loud in public without apparently noticing. So now, when you know, what do you do? And I want to be careful here. I'm just a woman who's noticed this world run by men, but knowing and not doing has not been working out well for any of us. I'm Kara Burrell, and welcome to the Timmy Did What podcast. It's Kara Burrell and Ryan Fisher. Hi, everyone.
That's
hello to my amazing co-host, Ryan Fisher. Thumbs up. What's up, dude?
That's a really insightful intro that kind of hits at the core of what has given Tim his power, this ability to take tribalism and weaponize it for his own purposes. I mean, we see the same thing going on with Democrats, for example, have used the issue of guns, that guns are going to come and shoot your kids in schools, so we need to act against guns. Republicans are like, migrants are going to come after your family, we need to do something against migrants. Using this tribalism of a threat to your tribe, which is so powerful. And I've been watching this. It's such a powerful motivation tool for getting people to get behind your cause. Tim full well knew this, and he used that same psychological tool of tribalism to get people to give their money to OUR by doing fundraisers that I went to, making movies that I was a part of, where he'd cover stories like the Gardy Marty situation. A kid is kidnapped from church down in Haiti. And the message at the end of this is, you need to give us money because we're the only ones that can protect you from sexual predators that are coming after your kids. And so this PSYOP messaging is pervasive. Government, religions, so many people are using it. And Tim has used it to great effect. And I'm excited to get into some of the comments to like parse out how this works how we're being manipulated and the results of falling for such psyop tactics.
Yeah. And I started podcasting again for another season back in August, September-ish. And it was around the time that there was this horrific shooting in Michigan at an LDS church, right around the time that Charlie Kirk was shot. And I truly want to be a nuancehoe. I don't want to be divisive. I want to find the common ground that most of us have. And I think, sexual assault is one of the biggest ones. And I don't want to do clickbait. I don't want to be bashing Mormons in this. I want to invite Mormons to the table, members of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, and have like a real conversation about how we got to where we are. And I also hope that people will learn something who have nothing to do with Mormonism, who are interested in this topic because they find us such charismatic hosts of this show. But truly, my opening is about all of us. It's about how good people through moral disengagement can be okay with terrible things that in any other context, we would say, get that out of here. We don't want that in our communities. And I'm probably going to be talking about this a lot more on the channel. It's all involved, like the spiritual, the inner work, the news of the day, the existential dread that we all face about the doom and gloom of our society. I think it's all interconnected. And I think the foundations of what we should be striving for come back to connection and our commonalities and taking that moral disengagement that is in all of us and rooting that out and sitting with, the discomfort that is actually going to serve us well, that connects us person to person. So that's me. That's what I'm about. So wanted to welcome everybody to the live stream. You know the drill. There's links down below. We would love your donations. Thank you guys for all of you who have donated. That really helps keep the show sustainable. We have a Patreon. We have a donor box and a Venmo. So if you feel like we are contributing something valuable here today, we do not make a lot of money in just the YouTube ads and stuff. So donations, recurring donations are super helpful for that. All right. So Ryan, this is a kind of your brainchild of the episode today. So you went on Greg Madsen's YouTube channel maybe a couple months ago now and talked with a pro-Mormon, pro-LDS YouTuber who's been interested in finally talking about Tim Ballard. So if you guys aren't familiar with Greg, he's I've said some things that might be a little mean about him before, but I called him like the Mormon version of a Fox News host. That's kind of what I feel like he is, and maybe that's not mean, maybe that's just accurate. But overall, I think that he's a well-spoken guy, well-educated, and does have a heart for similar issues and good things at the end of the day. And once Tim Ballard, as we know, a couple months ago, started hooting and hollering about the church being involved in satanic child ritual abuse, coming out on different Christian podcasts, that felt like the moment in which he was obviously very distant from the church now. They excommunicated him. They wouldn't allow him to get back in despite his pleadings. And so he did a 180 and just called the church out for its satanic abuse and said, actually, they kicked me out because I was going to investigate it. And they kicked me out because they did not want me to go down that rabbit hole. The questions of satanic ritual abuse are a topic that I would love to dive in another time, but the reflections are still quite obvious. And it made a lot of people within the LDS church and podcasting community feel very upset that Tim, again with my intro, you can say a lot of things about the women and the sexual assault survivors. They'll get over it. Like the women who have been raped by Tim, they'll handle themselves, but the church needs a defense right now. The church cannot handle Tim Ballard saying such horrible things about our institution right now. So they jumped on Tim pretty quick and invited my buddy here, Ryan, who was business partners for a long time with Tim, traveled the country with him, and close friends, close allies, believe the same things in the church about American covenant and all kinds of things like that. So nobody's had more of an inside knowledge than Ryan. He's in the top 1% of people who have really experienced the Tim Ballard show, so to speak. And he went on Greg Madsen's podcast, and we've been just really interested in the Mormon response. So we're going to play some clips from that and read some comments, read some data. And yeah, so Ryan, how's that for an intro? What else do you have to add?
Yeah, no, good stuff. Yeah, this saga has been going on for a couple years now, and I went online and issued a public statement on my YouTube channel, the Nephi Explorer channel, telling people what I thought about Tim over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And because I felt at the time that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the church, Mormons, we created this monster, and it's our responsibility to limit the destruction and the damage that he's causing. Okay. And I really expected a pretty swift and severe reaction when the women, half dozen women came out accusing him publicly of sexual assault, for the outcry to be very swift, very damaging. And what I didn't expect is that the members of the church would remain silent, would give him the benefit of the doubt, would even defend him and protect him after so many testimonies in a public press conference came out. I was shocked for two reasons. One is I believe members of the church are good, moral people that want to do the right thing. And it should be very, very apparent who is the victim and who is the predator in this case. But also, I expected the people that would work with Tim at Operation Underground Railroad to also come out in droves in opposition to him. And that kind of support did not come. I thought a dam was going to be burst 2 years ago, and that kind of support and anger against him did not come. And so I've been scratching my head for a really long time as to why, like what is going on in the minds of members of the church that bought his books. This guy was Deseret Books' #1 author for 6, 7, 8 years. I mean, you walk into a Deseret Book, which is a church-owned bookstore. There's 10,000 of them in Utah, Idaho, Arizona. And his books would be on a front and center kiosk, whole series of them. They rolled out the red carpet. He was their #1 author. They invested a lot of money and time into promoting, into advertising him, made him a poster child for the Mormon church. And so he has a huge following within the Mormon church. And I expected that following to turn on him. And that following did not turn on him right away. It's taken 2 years for that simmer of dissent to this poster child, the baby of Elder Ballard, to reap some sort of consequence in the public arena for his actions. And so we finally have that happening, but man, it's taken a long time. And so I really want to dive into these comments of the people who have had this change of heart to see what was going on in their minds, how this evolution happened. It's a really, really fascinating. I've been following it so closely, been following what's happening in the church closely. And a lot of people that were fans of my TV show that featured Tim are also some of the people that were defending him. The whole Book of Mormon evidence crew, Rod Meldrum, Wayne May, Bruce Porter, those guys have defended him, have remained silent, have not done anything that shows even a little bit of integrity in this regard. And so that's been super disappointing, people that I associated with at the time. So I'm trying to figure this all out. And I think we finally got some answers with this interview that I did with Greg Madsen, who is a pro LDS, very active member of the church, who invited me on his show to talk about Tim after Tim accused the church of satanic ritual abuse of children. And so that apparently is what got people motivated to denounce him, to change their opinions about him. And so we're going to get into what that says about the mental state and where the loyalties and integrity and doing the right thing lie among members of the church, not as a criticism at all, just as it's just a really fascinating place in this culture that we live in, and how this all evolved.
Right. And I really like what you said.
So I think we're going to start with.
So I was in the middle of complimenting you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I really liked what you said
Please continue.
last time. There's two things that really stood out to me in our last episode. And one of them was about how the toll that Tim Ballard and this whole saga takes on us personally. And you mentioned the word communities and how it upsets you that this man is still in your communities, where in Utah, where we raise our families. And I just wish that we could get out of the tribal nature of the culture war that I feel like Greg Madsen's channel probably leans into way too much, right-wing podcasters and so forth, who the amount of time that they talk about transgender people in women's sports or something versus the amount of time that they spend calling out predators or understanding how predators take a hold of victims in the LDS community. Like, instead of understanding the systemic institutional issues within their church, they can point the finger outside to say that it's, those weirdos or these satanic people or those. And it's just such culture war bullshit. So when you want to say, like, why are people suddenly paying attention? It's, it is not because of having a moral or spiritual discernment the majority of the time. It is an abundance of evidence. And I just want to just call that out, that if you have a problem with something in society and you spend 99% of your time talking about marginalized groups being the problem and not looking at the men who hold the power, who make these institutions and who we have to prop up instead of listening to women and what's been done to them, that is foundational to what I hope is the gospel of Jesus Christ. But maybe it's about complaining about transgender people in women's sports. I don't know. That's just, it's the culture war. It's people being incentivized to rage bait and make people angry. And that leads into the second thing that I thought you said really eloquently last time about, like, does anyone feel the spirit when Tim Ballard is talking? Like, do you feel closer to God? Do you feel like this is a representative of your beliefs, or is this a representative of your political ends, and a crusader against the things that you hate, right? And that's just, I don't mean to sound condescending to people who are listening, because I still have my own issues and I'm still figuring it out, but any chance that I can get to just come from a place of end this tribalism around us versus them. And I want to think of myself right now, like, as a Utahn, like, as small as I can. I live in a suburb of Salt Lake City. I'm building my community. I'm investing money and time into a community, like a post-apocalyptic mindset, basically. I'm like, if there's a predator in my community, I would want to root that person out. And like I said in my intro, we can see things at a massive scale, like with the Epstein files, and feel so hopeless and overwhelmed that this is the corruption that we live in. But I'm looking at the state of Utah where I live, and the politics, the theocracy that goes into shaping our culture and our laws. And I want to raise my daughters in a place where people are having these conversations and we're instituting policies that protect the vulnerable and not protect the men and the good names of institutions. Fair enough. And let me just get to a super chat. Paisley, you're the best. Thank you so much for the $50. Just want to say, the hair glowing, healthy skin. Y'all both look good. Keep the pressure on Tim. He is actively dangerous. Your work is protecting our society. Thank you for what you do. Oh, thank you so much. That means the world. And being called attractive.
This is the first time I've been included in a comment about our looks. Usually you get all the comments and stuff. So
he's married.
So thanks for that.
I'm single. Paisley, I'm gonna give you my digits. Just kidding. Okay, to catch you guys up about where we're at in this Tim Ballard saga, the unraveling of a hero. So the timeline of the public decline, we have June 2023, resignation from OUR, being kicked out, for an internal investigation. Tim Ballard resigns following a third-party investigation into claims of sexual harassment. And then July 2023, it's the height of his public visibility with Sound of Freedom coming out. And the film was released shortly before major denunciations began surfacing. That would be then in September 2023, total institutional break. The LDS Church excommunicates Tim Ballard and issues a statement separating itself from OUR. And then at the end, we have manipulation of the work. Supporters expressed feelings duped by a pattern of manipulation disguised as child rescue. And patterns of alleged deception, loss of high-profile allies. So this is another thing that is informed the LDS populace. Former supporters like Mormon Glenn Beck and Elder Ballard of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles publicly denounced Tim Ballard's recent actions. So that's a little, I'll nuance the Elder Ballard's part because it's more as a representative from the PR department on behalf of Elder Ballard saying their friendship has ended. But overall, their friendships, all his high-profile friendships, were over. But he has curated a social media narrative, and critics like us allege Ballard systemically deletes negative comments and blocks users to maintain his image. Now, I wish so badly that I wasn't blocked by Tim Ballard, but if you're not, just count your blessings and use your discernment of what you could say. So we want to go into the first video, or should we read the comments?
Yeah, let's go to the recent post that he posted about calling President Oaks a liar. That's the new stuff.
Okay.
So if you could bring that.
That's in
full screen. So we can read through that.
Oh, these. Is it the picture that you sent?
It's in.
Yeah. Okay, I found it.
The
we're going to share
Greg
this
Madsen interview. It's the very first. Yep.
Is this it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. So in that picture with President Oaks waving, scroll up a little bit, or down, sorry. So we can read the caption at the bottom of it. Yeah, right there. President Oaks says, "We should not add to the extremism that divides our society." And Tim posted this on his Instagram channel. And then he responded to that by saying, if you could read that, Kara, I can't quite make it out.
Tim Ballard. I agree, President. Would you consider it extreme for your PR director, Doug Anderson, to lie with the support of the PR committee about one of its active members? Active in what, Tim? Active in what? A drug addiction? Okay. And would you consider it extreme to send the lie to pro-pedo, anti-Christian, George Soros-owned news media outlet called Vice News? Would you consider it extreme for the church you run to violate every scripture mandating church discipline in order to excommunicate an active member? Would you consider it extreme to know you have lied as an institution but refuse to retract the lie, even though the lie has hurt and is hurting countless children? Would somebody please think of the children? And how does this all fit with your predecessor's messaging about being a peacemaker? I'm asking for a friend. P.S. Before you all judge me and put your own souls in peril, please go to my Linktree and watch the first 3 episodes of Backfire, the excommunication story of Tim Ballard.
Prophet of the church. He's taking shots right at him, calling him a liar on social media. That's where we are today. This was just posted pretty recently. First off, I got to point out extremism and the definition of the verb that he's using, extreme, are 2 totally different things, but he completely missed that point. And he again circles back the problem. Like, I mean,
you're right. He's using extremism.
He's a thesaurus.
Yeah, I don't know my grammar well enough. Maybe somebody can tell us. But yeah, is Oaks is using it? Extremism is, I don't know, is that an adjective that is describing, or I don't know, it is a kind of a verb. Like extremism is,
Yeah. Extremism is in reference to terrorist organizations, to people that use their beliefs to commit extreme acts of violence against others, things like that. Extremism that leads to very bad consequences. And then he uses the word extreme to try and somehow link that to himself and his story. It's just he's so egocentric. He's so myopic. The world revolves around him, and the worst things what the church really needs to like pay attention to, not extremism in our society that is causing division and violence and political violence and all that. They need to be focusing their attention. President Oaks needs to be focusing his attention on what Tim considers extreme views on denouncing him or the excommunication of him or whatever. I don't know. It's just that's absolute ridiculous. I don't think he understands the difference between the two words, obviously. But again, he's just calling out the president of the church. And so that's where we arrived. First off, sexual ritual assault or satanic ritual abuse allegations from a couple months ago. And now he's taking shots right at the current president of the church. And you have to understand, like, from my perspective, how shocking this is coming from the guy that had his books plastered on the front center console of every Deseret book, the church-owned book. So the Deseret book is the media outreach. It's, it's the information outreach. It's where prophets of the church, apostles of the church, post their own memoirs, their own books at Deseret Book. And he was positioned his thoughts, his religious belief, right alongside the memoirs of President Russell M. Nelson and Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson and all the writings and books that President Oaks has done. Tim was right there on the same shelves with those guys. Yep. And now he's taking shots at the leader of the church. And that's, you have no idea from our background how brazen and bold that is. But then I've also find it absolutely hilarious that he's telling President Oaks and everybody to go back and watch his videos on the Backfire series, as if President Oaks is going to be like, I really don't want to bring condemnation to my soul. I should probably go rewatch those and rethink everything that the church has done and handling this Tim Ballard situation. Like, that is like the most arrogant, self-righteous position that Tim could take. He just keep one-upping the self-righteous arrogance, like, every day. He finds some other way to one-up it. So that's fine. That's where we're at.
Thank you, Limbo Dumbo. I can imagine how drunk and red-faced he was writing that. Yeah, I don't think that he has a handler. Maybe he should. This is why people in the industry have handlers. Yeah.
I presented on Greg Madsen's podcast just saying stuff that we've been saying for 2 years. There's been like really nothing new except for the satanic ritual abuse allegations against the Mormon church. Everything else was the same stuff, same allegations that you and me have been talking about 2 years. But their audience, their reaction is really, really fast.
Is moving forward. I have people that have been listeners for several years of the program, and all of a sudden they're showing up in the comments and they're talking about, well, there's enough evidence now on the SRA stuff, and I think Tim Ballard's right, and there's a big deep conspiracy, and I'm settled now. I think this is all real. And I'm just, I've got a few of those comments. I'm like, this is insane, that someone would think. I know that Tim is very convincing, and I know that he fights for these ideals, or apparently fights for these ideals that people can really be emotionally compelled to be a part of, right? And I think that's what he's used all along. But at this point, where he is directly fighting against the church and making insane accusations against church leaders and the church as a whole, I worry that people are going to fall into his little spell and start believing what he's saying. because they've put credibility in him before at a moral level, right? It's not just, okay, I believe at a moral level, they've committed to him and supported him. And I think it's easier then in the future to do the same thing.
I'm putting the comments on screen just to encourage you guys to hang out with us and show that I respect all of your amazing comments. So behave, everyone. I'll take them off for a second, though. What Greg Madsen, Pro LDS podcaster, is worried about is when Tim's talking about the satanic ritual abuse in the church, which, again, just put a pin in that. A lot of people have opinions, and we'll pin in that. We'll talk about that another time. But nonetheless, he's saying that now, because of Tim's moral hierarchy, that they see him as such a great guy, when he says things about the church, that's going to cause people to lose their testimony, believe his claims. And I mean, my first response to that would be, if there is satanic ritual abuse in the church, that would be horrifying. We can see that it's happening across the Epstein class for sure. So it wouldn't take a stretch of the imagination. I mean, all conspiracy theories are basically like proven as facts now at this point. If you would have said the Illuminati 2 years ago, I would have been like, slow down a second. But now it's basically mainstream to talk about things with the elite pedo oligarch class trafficking our children in and out of their islands and on their planes, right? But as it relates to the Mormon church, could they be a part of it? Very well possible in some way, shape, or form. Wouldn't you agree, Ryan? I don't know the answer to that. But as an institution, what frustrates me is that I don't think it's an institution, like I said at the beginning, that cares about women, that cares about children. I'm going to come out and just go on a 2-second feminist rant for a second. I hate to say it, but our society is a pedophilic society. Our society, the church included, is a patriarchy that puts the priorities of men above the vulnerable, above women and children. It's just the way that it's structured. If it causes harm to the institution's name or to men in power, then women and children are going to be the ones laying underneath the car as they back over it into their parking spot in the temple. So I don't know if this is a wake-up call for Mormons more than it's just a bigger conversation about whatever is happening with abuse within the church. The groundwork has already been thoroughly laid, and I wish people would recognize that, but Ryan, what are your thoughts, and why did you want to pick that clip?
Yeah, well, it's a great admission, and Greg's absolutely right that people in Tim's camp have given him a moral pass. They've determined that he is a moral, righteous, good person, primarily because of his books and the things that he said on my TV show. But the books, especially, this is where his power and the whole ruse and the whole grift gets its strength from, is he puts these books out there. People read the books. They really like them. He's positioned amongst the other writings of the leaders of the church. He is, by association, deemed as a trustworthy, credible source. And so his moral authority and his trustworthiness comes from this book career and these writings and these public appearances that was all created by Elder Ballard and the church. And Greg comments on that once people give over, like, categorize Tim in their mind as a moral, trustworthy source, then any information that contradicts that, it's just like, it's like bullets off of steel. It just bounces off. They don't even consider it. And by default, but what Tim's doing is absolutely nothing new. We see the exact same playbook and being done with the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and presidents and leaders of the church today, where they prop up each other and position themselves as moral authorities for society. I mean, you see it like Quorum of the 12 Apostle members talk about each other and tell stories about each other and sustain their profit, and talk about, in every conference, they are all cross-supporting each other by giving each other moral authority, and then the books that they write that are in Deseret Books and the conference talks and everything. At the foundation of all of it is to establish trustworthiness and moral authority. Now, members of the church would say that that's totally valid and warranted because these are good, honorable men. If that's what you believe, I'm not here to like try and shatter that at all. That's totally fine. Believe what you want to believe. However, the playbook that Tim's using is a direct copy of what the church does to build up their own leaders into somebody that should be a moral authority in your life. And so when members of the church determine, because everybody around them is saying that this person is a good, righteous person, that's a moral authority in my life, I'm going to accept whatever they speak as truth, then the discussion's over and they just become a follower of that person, regardless of what other kind of evidence or anything that comes forward that's to the contrary. And Tim used that playbook, that recipe, to his own advantage in moral authority by association way. And so this is like foundational to his entire career in the public sphere, his entire trustworthy following, loyal following. And we're going to see that in the comments, how because people have categorized him in their mind as a moral, trustworthy source, a lot of it thanks to Elder Ballard. And I talked about this on Greg Madsen podcast. Some of those comments were edited out, which I understand why, because members of the church are told in the temples not to speak evil of the Lord's anointed or say anything criticized. Especially Elder Oaks has said publicly that it's wrong to criticize the leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true. And I wasn't criticizing Elder Ballard in this interview, but I was holding him accountable and putting responsibility at his feet for, in part for who Tim became and the moral authority that he got because of his association with Elder Ballard. So what's happening with Tim is just a carbon copy of what the leaders of the church and the relationship between the membership and the leaders of the church, and he's co-opting that playbook. And so that's kind of sets the stage. It's a foundation for understanding why he has the power and the sway and the following, and the hardcore members of his fan base that are still there, even though there's so much evidence to show that he's been lying, that he's dishonest, that he's an alleged sexual predator. There's a switch that gets flipped in these guys' minds that won't allow them to even accept that. And so that we're starting from, and reset and come back in. You think you can talk for like a minute or two while I try and fix that?
I'll tell you guys what project I'm working on right now. That's another episode that I hope to release by Thursday. You guys know about my Mormonize Me project, right? Everyone's been anxiously awaiting my report on what it was like to be Mormon for 30 days. And to be honest, it really fucked up my brain, and I have a hard time putting and synthesizing down my experience because it's kind of unlike anything I've ever been through or I've seen anything on the internet. Just one thing real quick. It was heavier than I thought it would be because I don't know about you guys, but around January, right after Renee Good was shot, I feel like in our collective consciousness of people who have empathy, I don't know what else to say, it just felt like a real sinking into, oh shit, this is really truly the end of an empire. This is the end of the American dynasty. This is where we peaked and we are really heading for a downward spiral, as well as the war in Iran kicking off. And I'm working on a video right now basically about how I can't even talk about my Mormonize Me project without talking about the type of Mormon that I was raised to be, which was extremely pro-Zionist. My parents have been to Israel. My dad wears a kippah just for solidarity, even though he's totally Mormon. And the end days kind of apocalyptic theology that is just part and parcel of being a Mormon, that you are saved for these latter days. It's literally called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I was at a dinner party last night with some friends, some ex-Mormon friends, and I was telling them about this. And they're like, you know what? And the husband and wife started speaking in their mission languages. And they're like, yeah, in Dutch, it's, the Church of the End Days, the last days. And in another language, in Greek or whatever, it's the same thing that literally translated in other languages. It's the Church of the Last Days. And how people within my state, within my political representation here, they are really jonesing for an Armageddon to bring back their Messiah. And when I was trying to be Mormon for 30 days, I could only Mormon the way that I used to Mormon, which was, I don't like the Book of Mormon Jesus. He is all about sinking people in Zarahemla and come unto me and do nice things to each other. But also if you don't, then I'm going to burn you alive in a bunch of tornadoes and volcanoes and stuff. Don't like Book of Mormon Jesus. New Testament Jesus, I can rock with that. So I was reading a lot of that New Testament Jesus, and it's a lot of mourn with those that mourn. It's a lot of don't let the outside things that are supposed to disconnect us really disconnect us, and we are all sons and daughters of God, and that type of Jesus feels incompatible with the Jesus that is cheering on a World War III and wants to see what Mormons are trying to see, which is the comments that I've been reading is they're really grateful that Iran could be opened up to missionary work now. So school children being bombed, again, the moral disengagement I talked about at the beginning, really the ends justifying the means for your tribe. And being so callous about the suffering of others as long as your prophecies are coming to be fulfilled. And there could be a temple built in Iran now. Now we can have missionary work in Iran. Like if that's where your brain is going, I understand it, but also I don't think fundamentally what the greatest spiritual teachers, Jesus included, were talking about. I think he was saying, settle yourself for a second and truly feel the empathy and mourns with those that mourn. That there are people's lives and families who have now been ripped away. That this is not just supposed to be a fulfillment of prophecy, but this is actual real people who have to bury their loved ones now. And I'm sure you guys have seen I was already preparing this for the last 2 days and really hot on the case. And then just last night, I don't know if you saw, the commanders accused of framing Iran war as biblical mandate, Jesus's return. So there's been some insider whistleblowing from different branches of the government that people who are not on board with that are like, duh, that's not what I signed up for. And confirmed my suspicions that people are waging a war to bring about the end times and not anything in America's best interest, not in, the safety and security of our entire world. There is an apocalypse that people want to bring to the forefront. So Ryan's back. Just wanted to start a conversation on that. And it's hard for me to even talk about my Mormonize Me project without talking about how sad that has made me. And I was trying to change my coping skills and be Mormon through January, through what I felt like was the strongest hit of nihilism that I have ever had for the state of our country and our world. If you guys felt that too, please let me know. Please let me know I'm not alone. One commenter under Greg Madsen's video named Christopher wrote, I felt so duped and similarly like I lacked good judgment. It's so obvious after hearing these stories and pattern of manipulation he has been using on everyone. I'm glad that you finally recognize that, Christopher. Any comments so far, Ryan?
Yeah. A lot of people feel duped, but it wasn't until he attacked the church that they came to that conclusion.
It shouldn't take that.
Yeah, so that's just interesting. That's a very, very common, very, very common.
Yes.
It's taken 2 years for people to come to that conclusion.
There's a second comment here from Christopher that says, I was one of the millions who believed Tim. I also saw anti-Mormons talking bad about him and assumed he was in the right because of that. I felt so duped and similarly like I lacked good judgment. Oh, I mean, not to be condescending or anything, but ex-Mormons, we have some good points. All right. Don't shoot the messenger. Okay. Another person said, we want our hero so bad that we are easily duped.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then
that's a really insightful. Tim positioned himself as a hero. He sought hero status in all the movies. That's the whole purpose of The Sound of Freedom, is so that he would become an American hero. So he would have hero status in the minds of people, and then he could use that position to control them. Not just the people he worked for, but his entire audience.
100%. Remember, he says, we're going to be storytellers now. Our job is not rescuing kids. That's what the depositions say that Tim says, that he is in this job to be a storyteller. And man, can he spin up a story, to quote Krista Casey. Another comment says, the second Tim started bashing the church, I knew he was in the wrong and lost all respect from him. And again, I want Mormons to be watching this, but you guys gotta laugh. You guys gotta laugh or cry or rage or flip over a table when you hear kind of stuff like that. I don't care where you come from. The second he started bashing the church, I knew that he was in the wrong. That's what it was. It wasn't all of the news stories all across Utah News and all across the New York Times and different publications that Tim Ballard had been very credibly kicked out of his own organization. That is all you needed to know. When the church denounced him, 1, when he's kicked out of his own organization, 2, 3, when all of the women come forward with their names, faces, lawsuits, evidence. If that doesn't tell you what you need to know about the patriarchy, fuck all. Like, come on, guys. Come on. I knew that he was in the wrong when he started attacking this one holy order and place. Let me tell you something. Can I rant, Ryan? People, would you indulge me in just one other small rant? I'm on a feminist kick right now, and I hope we're all on feminist kicks, to be honest, after the revelations of what kind of pedophilic world we live in now. But I'm not the most articulate speaker at all of these things. I just try to speak from the heart. But what it really freaking comes down to for me is that people who care about women and children, who do it honestly for clout, for the perceived identity that you get by being somebody who donates to an anti-sex trafficking organization, who fights against ex-Mormons. Like, in your identity and in your culture, there are things you say, rituals you participate in that make the people you want to admire you because you say the things like them. It means fuck all to women and children and people who are vulnerable. And I would hope to the Lord and Savior that you worship, if your words are empty and meaningless because they only support a man-made institution. If Christ is real, if you are following him in the latter days, it should then naturally follow that in these latter days, you root out the things that Jesus Christ would want you to root out. Okay. And unfortunately, the church, I know that there's like a big resurgence right now of Mormon women who are like, we are so happy. How dare ex-Mormon women tell us that we're not happy? Don't tell us that we're victims. Don't tell us that we're marginalized. Don't tell us that we're second-class citizens when we have all these rights. One, who do you think got you those rights? Was it the church that just woke up one day and said, oh yeah, we would like you guys to start praying in general conference, and we would enjoy it if you guys also participated here and there? Do you think that any reformations within the church happen because the church leaders just woke up one day and wanted to start giving out rights? No, it is top down, bottom up is how institutions this big and this powerful release the reins and let other people have access to their institution. And you have to credit one, ex-Mormons, progressive Mormons, and other movements that have given you the rights that you have today. But I know it's a big, scary word, the patriarchy word. I was a conservative for my entire life, and I still hold, overlapping of various different values. But the patriarchy was such a scary word, but it's fundamentally because it was water that I was swimming in that I didn't know how to dissect or understand. But it's like I said at the beginning, it is simply doing things and having behaviors, participating in things that at the end of the day will uphold men's opinions over the rights of the vulnerable, of women and children. And in a matriarchal society, it's not all just women run and men are on leashes with whips. Matriarchal societies have been suppressed from our collective consciousness and from our history books precisely because they invert power and they put it back into the people and into the community and into the vulnerable and into the children. And that is not a moneymaker. Simple as that. It's about money. It's about power, and everything to do with sex and real estate and optics all flow out of those couple of things when you're talking about the patriarchy. Those are just things I would have never understood when I was extremely Mormon and extremely conservative. And so when we say like, oh, well, we just have to wait until the predators within our church start criticizing the church, then you're too fucking late, guys. If you can't recognize things like when Tim Ballard said in our last podcast that Celeste Boris, his number one most famous, well-documented, alleged victim, his personal assistant, is saying that she had been sexually assaulted and raped by Tim Ballard multiple times. And his response as the number one active, advocate of anti-sex trafficking said she can't answer why she stayed with me because she didn't have a really quick response. Like, she's just a deer in the headlines. If it takes men that are put in that high position of power, that platform to that degree, it takes them saying things like that would not get them disqualified from your good graces. All of the evidence, being kicked out of his institutions, proving time and time again that he is a manipulator, that he's a fraud, that he is in this for the storytelling, the money, the optics, the access to power. He is an incarnation of the Mormon patriarchy. And the only way that you can discern that he has crossed the line is when he criticizes the institution. I'm sorry, but you're just too fucking late. And for LDS women, I love you. I support you in your journey of what you want to do. But I'm telling you, this is the incarnation of what the Mormon patriarchy is in Tim Ballard. That's why I pay attention to him. That's why he is our textbook study about cult mindsets, about patriarchy, and about how institutions like the Mormon Church will platform somebody and align their brand with him until it's no longer advantageous. Screw the women and children who are hurt along the way, just as long as they don't get hurt. It's emblematic of a wider pattern of our human societies, how we set things up. And I just want to call that out right now, that this is not just a one-off thing of one bad apple. The groundwork has completely already been laid. And if you're a Mormon woman who thinks like you're doing great, things are wonderful, hooray, one, thank the people who have come before you, know the sacred ground that you are standing on, and two, understand the systems and mechanisms that put men in your church into patriarchal power that could harm you and your family beyond your wildest dreams. That the church will never stand up for you. They will stand up for the men within the church 99 out of 100 times before they will stand up for you. Does that sound like progress? Does that sound like women are doing really that well in the LDS church? My answer is no.
Yeah. And let me put this into context, what you're saying, how this is like absolutely foundational to this whole conversation with Tim Ballard, because he is operating within this patriarchal structure that's not only in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how they view and revere men, but also it has bled over into law enforcement and the attitude law enforcement has taken against these women, including the courts. But the law enforcement, and we need to go into an entire different podcast about how law enforcement has not given these women the time of day, really, after they have come forward with these claims of these horrific things that have been done to them. And apparently half a dozen women is not enough for law enforcement to take them seriously, because no charges have been filed yet. Sim Gill recently declined to even file charges, which is an absolute travesty Like, we're talking about half a dozen women that have come forward with really, really disturbing claims of what Tim has done. This doesn't even include those that were internally investigated within OUR and settled by OUR with other women. There's a whole different group of women that had sexual assault allegations against Tim. But Sim Gill and Utah County law enforcement has not given these women the respect that they deserve. Now, if they had an ounce of integrity, I would say, hear their claims, go to court, and let's say they lose, that maybe hung jury or find that Tim Ballard is innocent of all these charges, fine. But at least give them a chance to give their testimony in court and for a jury of our peers to judge whether he has used the patriarchal system in a manipulative way. He used his position of authority over them in a manipulative way, and taken advantage of them for his own sexual gratification. At least give them that chance for them to present their case. But time and time again, Utah County Sheriff, Sim Gill, Salt Lake, have declined to even file charges to prevent these women from even being heard. That's what we're talking about here. And so the patriarchal systems that you're talking about, Kara, I didn't know this until I got involved and started watching this case unfold. I didn't know that that bled over into the corruption of law enforcement that goes all the way to the very top. Sean Reyes, the Attorney General of Utah, chief law enforcement officer over the state, was issued a report by the Davis County investigator that explicitly lays out the corruption, how Tim had corrupted Sean Reyes to do his bidding, to protect him from prosecution. And I attended the hearing from the internal investigation that was presented to the Utah State Ethics Committee, I think it's called. And they unequivocally stated that Sean Reyes was compromised, that Tim Ballard had an OUR had compromised him personally and his office, and was using him and his office for their own benefit. And all of that was all put in report. And the reaction of the Utah State Legislature was, well, we'll have to do better next time. Okay, good job, everybody. Pats on the back. No accountability. Sean Reyes is not being held accountable. He's not going to jail. There's no court hearing scheduled for finding justice in all this. So the patriarchy that you're talking about, that's pervasive in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that protects these men, has bled into every aspect of the society. And this is a system that Tim is operating in Utah, and it's the foundational reason why he's getting away with his alleged crimes. And that's just the reality of. And one other point that I wanted to make. If you're a member of the church and you don't think that the patriarchy rules everything, consider this. Right now, the proclamation on the family is being pushed really hard in all the wards and all the states. I still have one of my kids that attends church, and I have lots of friends and family that are in church. And so I'm very aware of what's going on. And proclamation to the family, which outlines the roles, the gender roles for men and women and their purposes, and says things like the woman's primary place is in the home as a nurturer to the children, things like that. The proclamation to the family is being pushed really hard, as it has been for the last 20 years. However, what most people don't know is that the proclamation on the family structure of the role of a father and a mother was written by the Quorum of 12 Apostles, and they intentionally excluded the General Relief Society president from even being involved in that conversation. They had no say in what the church defined as the family. It all came from the perspective of the men. And this was an admission from the Relief Society presidency of the time, who talked about this publicly because they were so disturbed and bothered that they found out about the proclamation to the family when it was announced and read out loud in General Conference. We're talking about the document that defines the roles of men and women. that did not have the perspective or didn't even seek the guidance or counsel of the women that are in the leadership roles of the church. That's today.
Exactly.
This is not 18th century, 1845 type of situation that came from back then. This is modern day patriarchy, that defining who women are and what their role is without even including them in the conversation. So
Right.
take that
Yep.
for what you will.
Yeah. Well said. I can maybe link a video in the comments if you guys are interested in watching. I won a Brody Award for this little video that I made with a clip of the Relief Society president mentioning that and references therein. They were about to do an entire General Relief Society meeting about diversity of families that they'd been working on for over a year, 2 weeks before the First Presidency takes him aside and says, actually, change of plans, that's going to clash with this new thing that we have called the Proclamation to the Family that we need to release really quick because we want to stop same-sex marriage in the state of Hawaii. And we need a foundational document proving that any same-sex marriage in the country would be an infraction on our rights. So we need to get this proclamation out there. So sorry, ladies. You guys can clean up the floor, though, and provide some snacks while we finish typing this up and printing it out if you want to. Just so demeaning. And again, when you're looking at a religious person, generally speaking, I think there's plenty of good things that religion can teach a person and why we've evolved with it. But man, when it comes to a religion that just seeks to add and compound more power into one group over and over and over again, you got to start paying attention. You got to start saying where your rights are being eroded. Like, it's the nicest way that I can say it. Come on, guys. Now, thank you for that comment, Ryan. And you're right on. This other comment from another Mormon commenter wrote, I myself thought that when it came out, the women were lying. I believed it. But seeing how he reacted towards the church really opened my eyes. I don't know what else we can say that we haven't said already, but gosh, we're in a really sad, sick state of affairs, if that's what it takes, you guys. If there's any Mormons in the comments who want to argue with me on that, but I can't see how, if this was a different institution, if it was the Catholic Church, if it was any other mainstream pastor or something like that, and allegations came out, why are we so quick to just believe that, oh, women are lying, women are in it for the money? I even saw comments once from some Mormon commenter who was talking about Kira Lynch, who's a hairdresser. She's obviously got her makeup on point, eyebrows on fleek. She's looking hot. She's looking snatched. And somebody said that she was obviously in it for the money because she has a lot of beauty things to maintain. So she needs to file a false civil, federal, and complaints of somebody raping her so that she can, like, I don't know, keep getting microblading. I am like, what the fuck do people really think it's like to be a woman? Like, Ryan, you're as good of a guy as it gets. But like, ladies out there, like, I really don't think men understand what it's like to live in this society. And that's just putting our eyebrows on fleek does not instantly equate to false accusations. I don't know. It's what an insane thing to say. But like, for most of us, I think there's a Taylor Tomlinson joke where somebody said, like, if you were a man for a day, what would you do? And she's like, walk around at night, something like that. It's just, men take for granted just simple luxuries, simple rights that women all over the world, including in America, just can't do safely. And it takes an enormous amount of courage to speak out against your perpetrators and against this entire system and say, I have evidence, I have something to say. I'm standing up not just for me, but for other victims who can come forward. Like, it takes an immense amount of bravery to do that in our society. And sometimes I think, just unless you're a woman or unless you are a man who's been through the sexual assault of some kind, like, your empathy is, the landing gear is just disengaged. Like, you just fly right over where you could possibly land and engage with members of the fellow human race.
So Tim claimed in our last podcast that we covered, he says that he's going to sue me, dishonest podcasters, and all of a sudden he's coming after us, and calls me out specifically, I think, because I went on Greg Madsen podcast. And this is really interesting because, I mean, Kara and I have been talking about this for 2 years, and he hasn't called us out in over a year since he did on the Troy Abel's podcast. He did a bunch of insulting podcasts, calling us the nuance duo or stuff like that, and then referring to me as Rai because wanting to insult me like we're insulting Tim by calling him Timmy. Yeah, we're totally trolling him. I'm not going to deny that. I know that stuff gets under his skin because I know him personally. Like if anybody talks about him in any sort of demeaning way. However, he's coming after us and dishonest podcasters recently, saying he's going to sue us in part because of the Greg Madsen podcast I went on. It has, I think, like 60,000 views last I heard. And it's been interesting to me because all of these friends that I have in the community here where I live have come across that podcast, and they're like, I had no idea, that you were involved with Tim and stuff until I saw you on the Greg Madsen podcast. And so obviously that's doing some damage. Obviously that's making the rounds among pro LDS folks that are turning on Tim, that are revolting against him. And I'm happy that that's the result of it. I'm really happy that Greg had me on. I'm really happy that people are hearing these stories and reacting in a negative way towards Tim and not believing him. So that's good. So Tim claims in this last video that we played in our last podcast that he's going to sue dishonest podcasters, that none of them did their homework. Well, Greg is somebody that did his homework. Props to him. And he's going to talk about some of the homework that he did prior to having me on and his personal experience in investigating the allegations that come forward. So Tim's going to sue us because we didn't, and he's going to sue Greg because he didn't do his homework. Well, here's the homework that Greg did. He's making shit up. Obviously, Greg did his homework more than most, and that's why he arrived in the same place that we have. So you can go ahead play his comments here.
He's being Matthew 18 compliant, as Tim would say, that he's not being. Okay.
I mean, based on these women's accounts anyway, which seemed very credible to me.
Yeah.
And they were describing very similar things individually of kind of how he would operate with all of this.
Tell me more about that.
I'll talk about this. But I was actually this was in September. I don't remember. I think the Vice article came out in early September, as I recall. I had just gone that summer to the Sound of Freedom premiere. I had Tim on the show that summer. I don't remember. It was right before. I think it was maybe a week before the premiere on this. So, all of a sudden, you come into September and everything hits the fan. The Vice article comes out. I'm in Egypt at the time. I'm in Cairo, and I'm having to stay up all night because everyone else here is, working through this during the day. And I'm getting on the phone with people about what's going on. And I've got sources that are bringing witnesses and the women knew the women and brought them in. And so I'm interviewing them for, each of them about an hour while I'm in Egypt and trying to get as much information on this as I can. I end up doing an episode on this at the time from my hotel room. But I don't go into a lot of specifics. And the reason I didn't at the time go into specifics is because, you've got a journalistic background. I don't, but I knew it would be unethical to go after someone so high profiled without having names. Mm-hmm. And so at the time, I did not know who I was speaking with. That's changed since then, but I didn't know who I was speaking with. And so I just felt that on the 1% chance that somehow somebody hired an actress or something to get on the phone with me, I'm not going to do this, right? I can't go through some of the specifics on this, but it was very obvious to me what was happening and that these women were real and that they were telling the truth.
Did you feel that their pain was genuine?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I felt their pain was genuine. It was all a ruse, as you say. It wasn't the couple's ruse that he was looking for. It was Tim's ruse, based on what their accounts were. Right. It was
right.
Yeah. Well.
And in Tim's account of things, there was $10 million that was a bounty placed on his head so that he wouldn't run for Senate and get the Sound of Freedom Act passed through Congress. And there was this big cabal of a conspiracy because, as Tim says it, that he noticed that there was satanic ritual abuse at some point in the last 15 years and brought that up. I mean, the timing, I would like to know when he brought that up. That would really help his case. Otherwise, still continued attending the church, still really upset about being excommunicated from the satanically pedophilic infiltrated church, still trying to do multiple appeals to get back into the church. However, $11 million was put as a bounty over Tim's head so that he couldn't run for Senate, and that he doesn't even know who these women are. Most of them, like, they're just making up wild accusations. And his story is just the fish that keeps growing bigger, right? Like, it gets more and more obnoxious and overblown. But from the very get-go, I do remember Greg making this video. It was not like his regular videos. He wasn't doing like a full report, but he just wanted to get on camera and say, hey, I've talked to some of the victims. It was similar to happened right after Eric Mustos, who's another LDS kind of right-wing podcaster. And Eric was also saying that he talked to the women. So you have these two men in authority within the pro-LDS podcasting community saying that they've talked to the women. And apparently, though, that wasn't enough for most people. Like, they can get on and talk about how the left wants transgender surgeries for 3-year-olds, and everyone's like, bet, hate them now. But if they say, hey, I have talked to some women, many of them actually are LDS themselves who were duped by Tim and incurred immense amount of sexual assault and harm by his lies, and that they believe them. Still, so many people were a little standoffish at believing the claims. Maybe even Greg himself, like you said, he's like, could this just be an entire, big conspiracy with actresses possibly? Like, I don't know. Just everything that you apply to hating your enemy, and like the amount of time, sorry, I keep saying transgender people, but that's like the number one thing they talk about more than anything. Drives me up a freaking wall. And I've talked to Eric about this, and I have said to him, I'm like, do you see the culture war now? Because people want to get into the whole, oh, I'm not left, I'm not right, when they're definitely right wing. And they're like, I just believe in common sense. And I'm like, is it not common sense that people want you talking about hating the marginalized instead of hating the very lovers of power that keep us all exploited and unable to access rights in this institution that we pay taxes into? Like, is this not just obvious that Elon Musk and X and Twitter and Facebook, that they want to harvest our energy, our attention, that there are people from around the world who pretend to be America first when really their intentions is just to sow dissent and disagreement among the American populace and make their money, keeping our eyeballs and our anger engaged on hating one another. Like, anyway, sorry, I went on a little bit of a rant there, but it frustrates me. I'm glad that Greg had you on, and I'm glad that he said those things, but it's like, and then what? Like, what does this tell you, though, about your own inclination to not believe women, but to believe the worst things, to jump to conclusions about the people you already dislike and you want to demonize? Like, it's a little bit kind of like, I'm glad, but also under my breath, rolling my eyes a tiny bit with like a little bit of a fucking took you long enough. But go ahead, Ryan. This delay is going to be the death of me.
That, like, I really appreciate Greg taking this stance, but it's taken 2 years. Like, that's disappointing. In 2 years for people to come around, it's like, it just shows you what attitude as a culture is against women who have sexual assault claims. And this is being played out right now in the Epstein files. It's the same situation. Like, the women are not being heard, even by Pam Bondi and the Justice Department, when the women are at the hearing right there behind her, and she's refusing to acknowledge them. And so
Despicable.
it's that sad state of affairs.
Yeah. And sadly, too predictable. To be honest, like, we're at the point where I'm calling balls and strikes. I'm calling things as I see them. And I've done a lot of soul searching recently about what kind of podcaster I want to be. And I really get anxious around making podcasts, spending a lot of time doing this when I could be doing other things. But I hope that my authenticity, even if you disagree with me, that we can find some common ground on things. And it should be that, man, these institutions are not out for the best interest of the people, whether we're talking about the Department of Justice, whether we're talking about the current administration or the previous administration. You know, I'm not partisan on that. Or the levies of power that exist within the state of Utah and the LDS Church, that people really need to have an uprising, honestly. I'm here to lead it. I'm doing my best. If you guys want me to lead it, I can get some torches. Oh, wait, those have already been kind of de facto to neo-Nazis. I'll get some other kind of, I'll light my lip gloss on fire. We'll do something else, but I'm really in Viva la Revolution mode right now. Right. It's just, I don't know what else to do about our sick society and the tribalism that exists here, and how, yeah, like you said, Pam Bondi wouldn't even look at the victims. Why? Like, why? What men? Have you noticed, like, all of the women who are taking a lot of heat in the administration right now are all women too? It's like Kristi Noem, Pam Bondi, the others, Ghislaine Maxwell, that are taking the heat for things. And it's just like, why? When did you stop being a girl's girl? That goes for Janet Russin too, Okay, should we watch the next clip?
Yeah. So this is really interesting. There's a group of the vast majority of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, in reacting to the podcast with Greg Madsen, they're waking up, their eyes are being opened, they're seeing Tim for who he is. That's thanks a lot to Tim's very angry rants, his unhinged rants that he's been putting out on social media recently. But then there are a subset of people within Tim's fan base that are becoming more hardened, more rejective of evidence, of testimonies, of all of this. And there's a group of people that believe that Tim, for whatever reason in their mind, is a righteous person, a prophet of God. He's even foretold of coming in the last days in the prophecies of the Bible. One of them being about a Davidic servant that comes forward in the last days. There are people, religious fanatics that believe Tim is Joseph Smith reincarnated, or the Davidic servant spoken about in the book of Isaiah. And he is building this hardened religious fanatic base that he is constructing right before our eyes. And he's feeding them this kind of BS. He's feeding this by referencing himself in this way. So he recently, I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, posted about Joseph Smith is going to come back and millions will know him again. He's dog whistling to his religious fanatic base, and they are not a small group of people. Mm-hmm. And so Greg makes comments about this on what he's seen as an insider.
Oh, great. Okay.
Well, it goes all the way up to the point of some people that I think are still close to him believe he's some kind of almost messianic figure. Mm-hmm. right? I've heard messianic figure. I've heard the Davidic servant.
Yeah,
I've heard all these things, and I'm like, are you kidding me? This is, and so it's a sense that, okay, this is someone. Of course, he has to be outside the church. He's got to be outside the church to be able to bring forward the real, true message that's got to be brought.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bad path, and people need to know that it is a very dangerous, bad path to go down.
Mm-hmm.
To reject the actual servants of God, and it's I don't know. It's that, again, that's why I'm speaking about this, and because I just see so much of this. I know people that have been close to him, and I know at least a couple that are still close to him, and that's the way they talk, and it's
Okay. That's the way he talks. Thoughts? I know everything that Tim says on his Facebook, and it when people here, I'll say it this way. When people try to get specifics from Tim, he always says, well, I have to think of this as from a spiritual angle. I'm sorry, that's just the way I am, because everything is spiritual and it's not really literal. And whether he's on a podcast with those Zionist bros that we covered a couple weeks ago, talking about Epstein, or a recent one that we should probably get to of another podcaster bro who was on a couple days ago, whenever he's confronted and asked like, okay, they have the world's number one sex trafficking guy right in front of them. Okay, so like, what's actually happening? Like, tell me the juicy, gory, horrible details of what's really happening, and like, how do people get access to these kids, and like, where are they being held, and and how is this being allowed by our institutions? And he always goes, well, I have to think of it spiritually. I got to think of these things spiritually, because that's the only way I can think of it, because I'm just such a righteous guy named Tim Ballard. And it's a spiritual warfare. It's spiritual, and references some scriptures, and children are the closest thing to God, and Satan wants to be like God. And so what does he do? He attacks the children. And that's why our children are under threat so much these days, because the world has given in to the powers of Satan and leftists, and what's the word that Islamophobes use? The Islamicification, political Islam. Those are the main three that he talks about: leftism, political Islam, and something else. Oh, sorry, I speak so fast that I forget the things that I already said. You're following, right? So he paints this picture to an audience, setting himself up on this pedestal of the spiritual guy who understands things from a lens that you guys just wouldn't understand them. And since he's been doing that pretty much since the very beginning, but extra hardcore since he's kind of under fire for all of these allegations, the spiritual warfare. Whoa, it's really rearing its ugly head. Look at me. Look at all of these people trying to take me down. It's obvious because I'm trying to save the kids. But, Jesus says that it's better to do something, I can't think of the scripture, than to harm one of these little children. God's kids are not for sale, that kind of stuff. He's set himself up in the minds of Mormons and ex-Mormons and non-Mormons alike to be this Messiah in and of himself, by the way that he talks. And people, you participate in this without really realizing that he's not just a guy who's trying to do badass Rambo things on film. Like, he has a mantle from heaven that he believes in. He truly does. Like, we don't mention this enough, Ryan, but like, the very first reason that you first came on my podcast 2 years ago to talk was to talk about the connections with Tom Harrison and Visions of Glory, and the second anointing that Tim most likely got that would allow him to either look at child abuse materials without feeling a guilty conscience, all the way to possibly doing the couple's ruse, because it was sanctioned under the second anointing ceremony in the LDS Church. If you don't know, it's a special secret ceremony just for the elites that most Mormons don't know about. As an ex-Mormon podcaster for 5 years, I would say it's the number one thing that Mormons, when they find out is a thing that their church does, they call us a liar, because they just don't even know about it. But it says that, you can commit anything up to murder in this life and still have your salvation secured. So, Ryan came on my podcast and talked about the conversations he had with Tim back then about a special blessing that he got from Elder Ballard that freed his conscience, and then blessings that he had from Tom Harrison, who wrote this really kooky book called Visions of Glory, which I actually have right here. Don't you just love how it's a show and tell. Visions of Glory by Tom Harrison, which is an inspiration behind Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell and the murders that they committed, and the influence of Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt, and so many different kooky, dangerous, doomsday, right-wing Mormon circles. And Tim Ballard was really good friends with the author of this book and Tom Harrison. And there was Ryan, you mentioned that he said to you, right, that part of Tom Harrison's revelations and blessings of Tim is that he would be able to create some kind of organization that in the last days, Jesus Christ would come and he would zap and kill all of the pedophiles that were harming children, and all of those children would need a container. They'd need somewhere to go, enter in OUR, enter in adoption agencies that he's run with his wife, Catherine, like children need families. These revelations that he would also one day become the prophet of the Mormon church, So if we take everything in its context from the very beginning, from the foundations of OUR all the way up till today, he has had the Messiah complex in his own brain and reiterated to him by very high level important people within the church over and over and over again. Like, he is high on his own motherfucking supply, So when, I mean, what else does that do but embolden a person and make them feel invincible? And honestly, the way that things have been going in the Utah court system, like he probably does have evidence to support that belief that God is on his side. And if he just keeps going the way that he's going, all of that will come to fruition, that he is that Davidic servant, and it's important for Mormons and people who have been followers, who are paying attention, to just call that out for what it is. If you believe in Jesus Christ and you believe in the teaching that in the covenants that you've promised, like, I think it does compel you to call out false prophets and false servants trying to take a chip off of the old brand for themselves. Mormonism is a religion that is not just the mainstream LDS church in the center of Salt Lake City, Utah. It's had many branches. It's had many different smaller cults and breakoffs and polygamous sects, and everything that Tim has done is really not unique to him. It again, a lot of the groundwork has been laid out by Joseph Smith, has been laid out by the patriarchy and the laws that exist to prop up men and harm women and children. So the pipeline for people like Tim Ballard to be spat out of Mormonism, it's not surprising. But if you are a believer in the church and you are a believer in Jesus Christ, recognize the issues that exist within your church, that it's not just this one bad apple, but it is a systemic issue from the top to the bottom, from the culture, from the doctrines, and Tim is taking advantage of that. Tim is taking advantage of that in the minds and hearts of religious people who I believe want to do good things, but have been saddled with a false prophet that they now need to expel.
He's taking a chapter out of the playbook of the LDS Church, where he builds himself up as a messianic figure, as foretold in Scripture, and then gets some people to believe that, and he's building a following. And mark my words, he is going to, at some point, start his own church. He's actually pretty much already started that. He has issuing religious messages, and he's starting a church with himself at the center of it in the prophet role.
Yeah.
And it's going back to the Tom Harrison prophecies. Tom Harrison again reiterated that Tim would one day become president of the church, and that's why he's taking shots at President Oaks. It's one of the reasons. And I think Tim believes that that's still going to happen, that he's still going to become president of the prophet of the church.
of some other kind of church, because this one's infiltrated by the deep state. This one has unfortunately got some sour grapes. It is past its prime. It has done some good, but now it's time for Tim to take it into a new era, no pun intended, with the LDS Churches magazine. Yeah. So it's crazy that Tim hasn't just like taken an L and shut up. But he keeps going, keeps pushing. And we at this podcast cannot keep up like every day. If you go to Tim Ballard's Facebook page, it is another like jaw-dropping revelation of like, well, shit, should I just be podcasting full-time here? Yeah. So I see a future where he will never shut up. And I mean, the only thing that he's good for is using his platform to raise money for the foundation, whichever one that he happens to be in at any given time during the week, whether it's OUR or the Spear Fund, or he has to jump to Aerial Recovery, dare I say Spear Fund, and now the Tim Ballard Foundation. Hopefully the one with his name on it. Well, he won't ever be kicked out of, but he's just going to keep fundraising and eventually maybe turn it into the Church of Tim Ballard of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you know? So let's read this comment. How is his wife still with him? Is she blind, deaf, complicit, or just completely in denial? I don't understand that dynamic there. Tim has all the characteristics of a sociopath and a narcissist who lacks any semblance of personal responsibility or humility. He's obviously a very sick individual. I also think he's dangerous. I was just going to say, in response to what's happening with Catherine, again, patriarchy. Like, if you look at people in a system that is set up to maintain the power and opinion of men, you will see this in every different type of marginalized group, women included, that there is, you've heard of a token Black character, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I mean that where people have access to power by agreeing with the majority. And in patriarchy, women in Catherine's position, they don't have any other options, and you can't actually look at your life and your choices and live from an autonomous place when you are raised like this, but then 9 children deep into a marriage with Tim Ballard. You have to just have some kind of coping and phrases and scriptures and thought-stopping cliches that you pump through your brain on a constant cycle to tell yourself you're happy, to tell yourself this is what God has made you to do at this time. It might not be comfortable, not be what you asked for, but in Catherine's point of view, I would guarantee that she is typical to a lot of Mormon women in extremely unhappy marriages with douchebags for husbands. I just talked to my mom on the phone the other night, and I would love to tell that story. I got a big laugh at the dinner party I went to last night when I told this story. Basically, my mom was describing how she has to wait on my dad hand and foot for a bunch of stuff since he's sick, and he has been sick, but he doesn't take care of himself or do anything that makes it so he doesn't hurt himself and inconvenience her. And I want my mom to have a happy, fulfilling life and hang out with friends and do things other than babysit my dad 24/7 and, you know, have a real fulfilling life. I want that for her. And she doesn't really want that for herself, is basically what came out of our conversation. And I think that is typical of a lot of Mormon women who are just taught to sacrifice, that your mansions will be in heaven if you put up with this. And the conversation ended abruptly when I went a step too far and I said to my mom, would you want me to be in a marriage one day like yours? And she goes, I don't like where this conversation's going. I'm going to hang up the phone right now. So, that makes sense. Like, we are not equals in this society. It's not just 2 lovebirds entering into a joyous union to celebrate their love and raise kids. There's power dynamics at play, and women all across our society, you know, they use that proximity to power to harm people that would normally be in their group of marginalized people. But if they can climb the ladder and leave other people behind, they're willing to do that. And it's not a conscious thing that people do, but I see Catherine is just complicit in the idea that her husband, he may or may not have done some bad things, but it's her mission in life to just be a faithful woman and charge forward. Like there's nothing that he could really do that would, I'll think that would cause her to divorce her husband. You know, he is her proximity to power within the church and in the afterlife too, right?
Yeah.
I'll read another one. My wife and I were friends with Catherine and Tim for years, and I still don't know the answer to your question. There are times she seems blind, other times she must be 100% complicit, and sometimes obviously in full denial or brainwashed by his lies. It's not clear to me anyways, and it might end up being all of the above. I'd like to figure it out too. It's really just Mormonism and patriarchy. I mean, I don't think it's that hard to figure out. I spent a lot of time trying to think about what's going on in her head. Does she know that he's done this? I do think she's known. She has had many, many dark nights of the soul that through the years of things that we probably haven't even reported on of, you know, your husband. Like if you think of Catherine as somebody who doesn't even take off her garments to snuggle with her husband. Again, I'm sorry for Catherine. I'm sorry that we know this personal information, but your husband revealed it. And now it's public record. She seems like a prudish woman. There's also some reports from the text message exchange that Tim was complaining to his couples ruse victims that she doesn't do very sexually adventurous things and that she wouldn't get a Brazilian wax. And, you know, you take that kind of marriage dynamic and then all of a sudden Tim is allowed to be in brothels and in these intensely, I'll say, non-Mormon dens of sin. Like she said in interviews, she's just like, I just don't even want to hear about it. I know that he's doing what he has to do and he has a blessing from the Lord and he's honest with me, but there's some things I just don't want to hear about. You know, she's probably, just consolidated a lot of that information to the darkest corners of her brain until she had to confront it. But can I say they have like an authentically in love marriage? I believe that Tim is a narcissist to his absolute core. And if you also notice that he's never home right now, I think he doesn't like to be home. So she's home with 9 kids, and that's probably how they prefer it. So if I was an armchair psychologist who was going over the entire situation, you know, I do think that you can't have a healthy marriage when one of them is a narcissist, and one that's as brazen as Tim Ballard. She's just probably holding on for dear life and waiting for her mansion in heaven, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, next comment. Yeah. All right, do you have something to say? Sorry.
Yeah, so in addition to that, Catherine and Tim have been living a very wealthy lifestyle for over 10 years. And if Tim loses his prestige, loses his funding source, so does Catherine. So there's definitely a profit motive in all of this. And I mean, shout out to Life Take Two. A man is not a plan, but in Catherine's case, her man is her plan. She's a traditional wife, raising 9 kids. Tim loses prestige. Tim loses his multi-million-dollar income sources, and Catherine loses that as well. So
Diane wrote, this man, Tim Ballard, is an incredible narcissist, like level 10 narcissist. He wants to be worshipped. How dare he say he knows his word comes from Christ? What a cocky little man. You tell him, Diane. Christopher wrote, so when it was about abusing women, you didn't care to interrogate it, but as soon as he spoke out against the church, you did. That's my point. I myself thought that when it came out, the women were lying. I believed it, but seeing how he reacted towards the church really opened my eyes, and this video confirmed it, and my heart was heavy with the thought that I believed him. Another commenter wrote, I so agree. I've always been a bit gullible and thought maybe it was just women trying to bring him down. Now I have more honest information from those who know him. I can see his narcissism more clearly. A true narcissist will never ever believe he is in the wrong. And to try to blame a general authority who is a true man of God or the church good is just evil and wrong. I feel sorry for him because he will face harsh judgment in the hereafter and will be dragging a lot of people down with him. That's why we are told to follow the prophet. I truly hope people can open their eyes. I haven't heard about Tim Ballard for many, many months and always wondered what happened to him. I'm thankful for this podcast and shedding so much light on this sad story. Again, we're reading comments from Mormons on Ryan's appearance on Greg Madsen's Pro LDS channel. Even Joseph Smith was human. We do not believe our prophets or any other human beings are infallible. I wouldn't be active if we were taught they were perfect. Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, I'm trying not to be such an anti-Mormon these days, but there's like, people aren't perfect. And then there's like, will you please go burn down that printing press so people don't know about my affairs? Like, if you want to compare him to Joseph Smith, yeah, it tracks. It surely tracks. But it's, again, this moral disengagement that I want to keep harping back to. That if another leader of another religion did it, you would know that that is disgusting and you would root them out of your community, your society, and you'd say, this person needs to face consequences for what they've done. But when it's in your in-group, you're going, they're human, you know, they're not perfect. All right, we all make mistakes, but there's mistakes and then there's acting with serious ill intent in a pattern of behavior because you've been emboldened by your mantle from God and you're surrounding yourselves with lackeys and supporters, you know, people who, you know, if I go to the bank and I withdraw $100 and the teller accidentally gives me a short amount of change, that's a mistake. And that can be rectified. If that bank teller did that to every single person who walked into the bank and pocketed their extra $10 and gave them 90 when they outdrew 100, for example, or something, that would be a pattern of behavior. And they're in a position of power where they can influence things for righteousness or for their own means and their own evil. So when you are, it's like Spider-Man says, with great responsibility, with great power comes great responsibility. So all of the things that go into who we prop up, who we think of as our moral arbiters in society, a higher amount of responsibility comes because they can then use that moral authority to persuade women to, let's say, when it comes to Joseph Smith, marry 22 of them and call them lying whores in a newspaper that he gets burnt to the ground so that the information can't get out, and has an entire militia enforcing his edicts, right? Same thing with Tim Ballard. You know, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? So mistakes can be made, but patterns of behavior should be watched. Okay.
And speaking along that lines of patterns of behavior, you brought up the Joseph Smith burning the Nauvoo Expositor. The current Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints right now is going after Mormon stories and threatening to sue them, or is suing them. They want the word Mormon taken out of their business title, their podcast title. And so the suppression of information that started with Joseph Smith is still going on today. And then the other point that I want to make is that that commenter, what was it? It just left me. What was that last comment about?
Should I scroll up?
Yeah. Read it again.
Not the Joseph Smith one. Gullible, trying to bring women down, narcissism, follow the prophet.
Just escaped my memory. Yeah. You were talking about the presidents, the leaders of the church not being infallible. So they'll say that, yeah, we're not infallible, we're not perfect. However, they do demand of their members absolute 100% unwavering obedience. It's wrong to criticize the church. President Oak says criticize the leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true. They are also sworn to never speak ill of the church in the temples. And then they say over the pulpit and reiterate this with every generation constantly, that the leaders of the church cannot and will not lead the membership astray. That's basically saying whatever we tell you to do is God's will, no matter what it is. and you have to be obedient to it. That's crossing over the lines of infallibility. Cannot lead you astray. They said, we will not lead you astray. So they demand absolute 100% obedience to whatever they say is God's will or whatever they're asking the membership to do.
Right.
So that's a power dynamic that just breeds corruption and breeds abuse.
Yeah. Nailed it, man. This is another interesting comments. Well, this guy's platform was trying to save children. I think it's fair to have doubted because you want to believe in the good and fighting for good and against the worst of evil, because those evils are very real even now. That's the thing about lying and liars. It's not easy to tell because there are people that lie to ruin good people trying to do good things. Again, we've mentioned this throughout the last month about the Epstein files, that it's very clear that there are horrific pedophiles in our country, in our world, in our society, at the tops of every institution. And they do try to suppress people who are calling out their evil all the way to the point of murdering them, So that kind of stuff absolutely exists. But let me go on. So that is very real. And there are people that lie to save face and act as a wolf in sheep's clothing. Absolutely agree. That's very real too. Yeah, I think Tim, it's wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a cloak of invisibility, I save kids, I can get away with anything now. You think I would ever hurt somebody? I'm the guy who saves kids. I think many wanted to believe Tim, not because of him, but because they wanted to believe in and support the work he was seemingly doing to rescue innocent kids. It's hard to know where the lies for him began or what fragments of the muddle are actually true, but it's very unfortunate and sad on many levels, especially for the victims and children or trafficking issue at large, because being dragged into this and undermined. To me, the thing to pay attention to is how people react. Joseph Smith was very Christ-like, long-suffering, and forgiving despite all that was done to him and his family even. Sometimes he spoke to it simply at most, then moved on and focused totally on the work and serving others. He was tarred and feathered, then his baby dies due to exposure that night, but he still woke up the next morning to serve and preach at church, and some of the perpetrators were even in the audience. And he didn't do or say anything against them at all, only shared messages of love on Christ. And it wasn't because he wasn't in deep pain himself, because he visibly was, but he still chose not to make it about himself. That says a lot. That can be tricky to discern in our own modern age. And it isn't foolproof, because sometimes when a person is wrongfully hurt, they can react in ways that appear poor too. Listen, my apologies to everyone involved who I've ever hurt. I just want to call that out myself. But sometimes... but time is a difficult thing to fight against. Time usually tells. Time is really telling, Somebody says, exactly, time is the best revealer of good and bad
so
fruit.
if I could comment on that.
Yeah.
That last commenter comparing, saying Tim Ballard, that Joseph Smith was a kind and forgiving person. Well, the version of church history that we've been given is a whitewashed version of actual events. Like in the case of Nancy Rigdon, Nancy Rigdon was proposed to in what's called the happiness letter that Joseph Smith wrote to her, proposing that she give herself over to him as a plural wife. And in response to that being exposed, Tim went to the press and issued salacious, defaming claims against Nancy Rigdon, that she was a whore, that she was a prostitute, some things along those lines. So the things that Tim's doing right now in calling these women working for the devil, reincarnations of the devil, calling them, in Kara Lynch's case, that she's some sort of whore, and things like that, is he's taking a playbook right out of Joseph Smith's playbook, who did the same thing to the woman accuser of his time. And of course, with the Nauvoo Expositor and J.C. Bennett and that whole story. So if you dive into your church history, you won't see a Joseph Smith that is kind, loving, and forgiving, but actually very vindictive, very accusatory, very reactionary, in the same way that Tim Ballard is right now. But members of the church don't know their church history, don't know the original sources, and they've been fed a whitewash version of events to make Joseph Smith look kind and forgiving and compassionate, in the same way that Tim is weaving a narrative about himself that he's kind, forgiving, and compassionate, while actually attacking and demeaning the women that he has also allegedly sexually assaulted. So I don't know. I take issue with that. Please do your homework. Please look into your church history, because even that tar and feathering event, you've been given a faith promoting example of that. Well, at the tar and feathering event, Joseph Smith was being tarred and feathered in part because the family he was staying with, he was making, according to the brothers of that family, Johnson family, who were in the mob, he was making either unwanted or very aggressive sexual advances against their daughter, Miranda. And because of that, they couldn't stand for it. And so some of the brothers helped organize the mob to castrate Joseph Smith. And they brought a doctor, I think his name is Dr. Dennison, in that mob party to castrate Joseph Smith, to stop him from making sexual advances or sleeping with, or we don't know the circumstances, but it was obviously very severe to elicit that kind of reaction. He was making sexual advances against their younger sister, or had actually done something to her. It's unclear, but the reaction from the brothers was to castrate Joseph Smith. And that's left out of the faith promoting story of the Mormon Church. And Joseph Smith going to the next day to preach to the congregation was a PR stunt by Joseph Smith to capitalize on his persecution and to weave the narrative into making him look like a very courageous hero status person, in the same way that Tim is doing today. He's taking the persecution that he's receiving, that he's labeling as persecution, as evidence that he's on God's side, that he's a righteous, heroic figure, in the same way that Joseph Smith was in that story. But if you understand the circumstances around that event, the tar and feathering came as a result of allegations of sexual assault, possibly, or sexual advances against a minor in that situation. And those that would argue with me that Joseph Smith was not interested in Miranda Johnson at that time, the family that he was staying with, and was not making sexual advances of her, well, later on, he took her as a plural wife. So he is about 10 years later, when he had more power, he took Miranda Johnson as one of his plural wives. So he's obviously very interested in her on a spiritual wife level. Later, a few years later, even though she was married to somebody else, Miranda, if I'm remembering correctly, Joseph Smith sent her husband on a mission. While he was gone, he took her as a wife. So Joseph Smith being a kind, honorable, forgiving man. Do your homework, read history, get outside of the whitewash version that being fed that's in the book and of church, because the true story is really more dark and disturbing, in the same way that the true story behind what Tim is doing is really dark and disturbing.
Yeah, and I didn't really expect this podcast to get into the parallels with Joseph Smith and Tim Ballard in present day. I've done quite a few analyses of this, but you bring up a great point about his tactics, about his suppression of the media, and but the spiritual wifery portion is something that Mormons are really uncomfortable with, and there's so many different, pieces of evidence that really you don't even have to look at the evidence that the women have brought forward in their case. If you want to just look at Tim Ballard's influences and patterns of behavior already, whether it comes down to visions of glory and his inspiration and blessings that he's had from, his I don't know, how would you describe it? It's like friendship is with Tom Harrison, the author of Visions of Glory, is not even strong enough, but his reverence for Joseph Smith and Tom Harrison really speaks volumes because of the spiritual wifery that Joseph Smith was involved in, and also Tom Harrison, according to our own personal sources that we want to have come forward one day. Tom Harrison, I don't know if he still works in the church as of the recording of this podcast, but he has up until just recently as somebody who helps potential missionaries going out on missions decide if they have mental illness or not, which is a really scary thing for Tom Harrison, of all people, to be analyzing as a social worker background, but more as a background of people who have influenced, again, Lori Vallow into thinking that, bipolar and mental disorders of various kinds aren't real. They're actually just demon possessions and zombies, right? Like that's scary enough on its own. But Tom Harrison, as it's been reported to us, has also had some similar ideas about spiritual wifery, and I don't want to make any allegations at this moment. I will just let you guys fill in your own gaps there, taking, again, from the playbook of Joseph Smith. So then you add on to that, Tim being told that, he probably has a second anointing ceremony. He has these blessings from Tom Harrison that he will be this righteous Messiah in the end days, be a prophet of the Mormon church one day, and then you put all of that manipulation into how you get women encircled in your organization, telling them that you can save kids, just the same way that Joseph Smith in the Happiness Letter is like, God has some ideas that we people don't always. If you look at the Happiness Letter, I'm paraphrasing, but in my own nuancehoe way of explaining it, it's Joseph Smith saying to these women, like, happiness is the object of our design, and sometimes things that are right under or wrong under one context are actually right under another. And that, if that's not the language of the couple's ruse, then I don't know what is. Of like, yeah, we shouldn't be doing tantric sex and doing all of this stuff in strip clubs and sleeping in the same bed and showering together and practicing our chemistry. But what looks like cheating and adultery under one circumstance is actually righteous under another. So Mormons, I am so grateful for any of the Latter-day Saints in the audience who are watching right now, but I'm sorry, I just got to call balls and strikes on that one. That is highly influenced by the prophet of the Restoration and people who are still employed within the church today, like Tom Harrison, And just on that note, I also wanted to read this comment from Krista. Thanks, Krista. She says, well, Kara, I have a confession to make. I am a believing LDS woman, and I'm here. I'm here because I agree with you and appreciate you speaking out. So keep up the great work on this podcast. Thank you so much, Krista. I love hearing that. I was Mormon for 30 days. So I have an affinity and I have an affection for Mormon people. Institutions I have some problems with. Prophets named Joseph Smith, I am a little bit curious about where they get off. But Ryan, I just ranted for a while. Any other thoughts, or should we move on? Your glitching is really going to be the end of this podcast. Sorry. Your internet's still pretty bad. Hate to break it to you. Wish I could give you some good news, but I can't. Let's read this. You're on mute. Uncle Rustables, thanks for the $5. Says, I'm active LDS. The way the church has been silent since Vice is probably good PR strategy, but I wish they'd confront him and help the victims. Yeah, I wish I could too. Maybe you can write a letter to the prophet and say, here's my tithing donations. Here's what I have said. I am friends with the Oaks family since I was raised in there's Elder Oaks' son's ward, and grew up with the president's grandkids. And they told me back when I was Mormon that Elder Oaks, President Oaks now, reads every single letter that he gets. So if you can find his address and let him know how you feel and include the tithing dollars that you have given. I just think more Mormons, if they can just tell the church what they think about it, that's the first of many strikes that we could have. Ryan, what do you got?
So you skip to the last comment that shows where Tim's fanatic base is.
At the very, very bottom?
At the very end of the document, I put in that comment that you sent to me.
Oh, great. Something that I helped with. Here we go. Okay. So this is a comment from my episode on Mormon stories with John Dehlin from a couple days ago. And this from Becky Wheeler really knocked my socks off. I would love to hear your guys' commentary on this one too. So in response to calling out Tim Ballard for a fraud and all that he's been doing, Becky writes this, apparently from a Mormon perspective, I would say. I just like to say this. The exposure of trafficking and pedophilia is the only way to become aware. Whether Tim is guilty of gross deception and moral line crossing is being used to silence a reality. Let's just say Tim created theater for his own profit. Then let's say Tim created reenactment of trafficking and pedophilia. Then let's say that Tim did run operations of such, fell into crossing moral boundaries. Then let's say he embellished the facts, lied. Then let's say that these women he allegedly took advantage of are telling the truth. He will pay if it's proven. You get where I'm going here. Here's a fact that has been buried here in an attempt to find the truth from all the righteous, egotistical, power narcs, content creating YouTubers, hell-bent on remaining relevant. He's equated in their small minds and narrow view this body of work that has been created by Tim, created by Tim and his associates, is now being discredited, regardless of how, who, why. Here is a fact. I don't know why they put fact in all capitals, but then in quotation marks. That cancels out those out. The representation of this very real and evil world has been exposed by Tim and his supporters, even his accusers. All the players are in play. The question here is who and what is being supported here by this presentation of opinions, facts, accusations, and accounting. I'm talking about me. Most assuredly, it is not helping the cause to expose trafficking and all its nuances. Does one really think that the evil we fight is going to give up its darkness willingly? Tim is not forgiven for his oversteps, but neither are you two for protecting this dark evil by discrediting the producer, even if justified. Like, is this not a contradiction sandwich like I've never heard? Like you kind of need to get to the bottom of whether you think his oversteps meant rape or his oversteps meant like putting his hand on the thigh of a couple's ruse coordinator, you know? Like, what do you mean by oversteps, Becky? She goes on, LDS Church, surely you must realize that if every individual story was taken back to its origin, they could be discredited, especially Joseph Smith's, by someone, something, by events, etc. But you yourself choose to support a cause in spite of some facts to save lives. And where is the error? Could it be in moral right fighting while trampling on the backs of victims? You are shutting up a voice that brought awareness and feeling of urgency to a real emergency. While you point out the darkness in Tim, you also slow the fight to rescue and inspire action. You simply cannot expect to win at stopping filth like this without sacrifice. Some things have to be beheaded, even if it looks wrong and is wrong. Nephi knew it. Lives are more important than style, John. Think about it. And I just want to say again, what a contradiction sandwich, but the sacrifice line makes me want to fucking flip a table. Becky, whose sacrifice? That these have to be done through sacrifice. Tim wants to talk a big game all the time that he has sacrificed so much. He has this barrage of people coming after him, the deep state, $10 million thrown at him, the sacrifices to his family. He's always traveling. Tim Ballard has graciously put himself in the spotlight from the very beginning. I mean, I have stories going all the way back to him filming his very first documentary series and trying to get that on Netflix, and Tim calling up Netflix and actually getting it taken off because he wasn't going to get paid enough. And he wasn't going to get his name in the spotlight, that he had to share the spotlight with other people. Time and time again, he has told that people that he wants to be a storyteller and not an actual doer in the cause of ending sex trafficking, which doesn't start with putting your face and name in the forefront of stories about brown people without rights in other countries. It's just, that's not the equation. I'm not a professor of, any of these things, but I feel like if there was a professor here, they would say, all right, we need to start from the bare bones of the crumbling society and world that we live in and the exploitation therein, and then build in good ethical practices on top of that. You can't just start with, a white Mormon guy from Utah who speaks Spanish from the mission that he served because he was trying to convert poor Chilean people into his Rocky Mountain Bible fan fiction sex cult, and use that Spanish and his connections to other wealthy Mormons to start a organization that produces highly edited videos that put out a certain message about white saviorism while also bringing some attention to kids. Tim has not been the sacrificial lamb in any of this. So whose sacrifice is it? It's the sacrifice of people who, one, have just been trying to actually fight on behalf of ending sex trafficking, the women who've come forward, who did believe in Tim's cause, who have sacrificed, they're not getting paid $500,000 a year like Tim. They're getting paid peanuts compared to that, sacrificing their bodies, their mental state. We've talked about before how Tim goes into Brian Black character, and it takes a while for him to decompress when he gets home from a mission because he's just such a badass guy, and he can barely even act. He's like, acting is hard. I have to actually be having sex with these women. What sacrifice is Tim actually really doing when it's the women who are like, okay, I guess if you say this is what the prophets or what Elder Ballard said is approved with the couple's ruse. Okay, if you say this is actually going to help sex traffic kids, you're the expert here. I'm not. I guess I'm going to go through all this traumatic, drunken rape at the hands of Tim Ballard and then go home to my kids and try to live a normal life. Like, I could barely do this podcast without needing to decompress afterwards. Imagine traveling to a foreign country and being assaulted by your boss and then having to go to after school pickup in your minivan every day at 3:00, like the sacrifices of men. Oh my God, the sacrifices of men out there is just really what we want to applaud. But the bodies and the sacrifices of the mind, body, spirit of women, not even to mention just the sacrifices of the children and the people who are in Tim's documentaries and films who don't consent to be used for his hero myth-making glory story in the first place, So I understand the concept, sure, that some sacrifices need to be made, but the sacrifices need to start with looking inward, looking at the society, looking at the patriarchy. The sacrifices need to be you, people, listening to what I talked about at the beginning with this moral disengagement, that if there's a sinking feeling like, oh, if somebody else would do this in a system that's outside of mine, would I pay attention? Would I root it out? It's a sacrifice of your own ego, of your own feelings that you know better, and taking a little bit of a step down and give the microphone to people who have lived the stories, who actually have been in the thick of it. It's just, I know we live in a very individualistic American culture, and the sacrifice of one man who went against all of the odds and left the CIA, like the sacrifice, we want to applaud the hero worship of one person, but Tim Ballard could not be where he is without the mountains and mountains of people like Ryan, like countless people who have come forward to us, whose lives have been ruined, who have been financially ruined, who have incurred trauma because of Tim Ballard. Those are the sacrifices. And it makes me say, whose sacrifices are you actually paying attention to and caring about? And when are the sacrifices too much? When are you willing to speak out? I could go off on Becky all day long, but Ryan, let me get you back in here. Becky.
Yeah, I would say to her that you can rescue kids and go after human traffickers and raise awareness without sexually assaulting the people that you work with. That's not something that has to happen. Those are mutually exclusive endeavors. And so justifying Tim in any way, shape, or form for sexually assaulting allegedly the women that he worked with as a sacrifice that needs to be made in order to raise awareness, or that the awareness and the good that he's done in this area gives him a free hall pass for sexually assaulted women, that is not justifiable either. And I have like absolutely no moral qualms with calling out Tim's alleged crimes. Because those are hurting real victims that I know about, that I can see, that we've talked to, that we've seen in press releases, real victims that have been hurt by him in a alleged sexual assault way. And if she's not willing to stand up for those victims, then she's not really a moral crusader against sexual assault in our society, against children, against women, against anybody. You can't pick and choose who is appropriate to sexual assault and who should be saved. You're either against sexual assault or you're for protecting pedophiles and predators. And so that's what I would say to Becky in this situation.
Mm-hmm. She's like, if you want to make an omelet, you got to crack a few eggs. No, when the omelet is the pursuit of ending sex trafficking, you can't sex traffic people while you're doing that. I'm sorry. It's literally the number one requirement of having to do that. That being your job title, And furthermore, great comments, Ryan. And what did you think about this last line here, where she says, some things have to be beheaded, even if it looks wrong and is wrong. Like, did you not contradict yourself, sweetheart? Even if it looks wrong and is wrong. Nephi knew it. Tim has obviously mentioned Nephi. If you guys don't know, in the Book of Mormon, Nephi is a prophet. He's a character in the Book of Mormon, fictional in my opinion. And he needed to cut the head off of this guy Laban to get some brass plates that eventually turned into the Book of Mormon, basically, and cut off this innocent guy's head while he was drunk because the Spirit told him that was the righteous thing to do. And, it's been long lauded within LDS lore that, sometimes we have to do incredibly scary, normally, like we're talking about the happiness letter, morally bankrupt things. But if it's in the pursuit, they'll say things like, is it better for one man to perish for an entire nation to dwindle in unbelief? Did I get that right? Like, it's better for one man to perish than an entire nation dwindle in unbelief. That's the kind of mantra that you can tell that Tim Ballard and Mormon followers like that are still applauding. It's deeply ingrained in Mormon scripture and in belief. But my response, I'd love to hear your thoughts too, Ryan, just come down to, even if I want to take you on your word, if I want to believe as a Mormon would in the Nephi story, let's say that the Holy Spirit really did tell him to cut off the head of Laban. That is one man in one instance. Do you not agree that should not be extended to just about anyone who claims moral and righteous authority from God to do and act in immoral ways because they say the ends justify the means? Like, every Mormon has to know better that if that happened, that should be a one-time occurrence and have a lot of checks and balances when other people try to use it. But when you have heaps of evidence and accusers and patterns of behavior, it's just so interesting to me that they will ignore all of that and still go back to the Book of Mormon type programming that, hey, it's the sacrifices that need to be made. Doesn't always look convenient. It's like she says, lives are more important than style, which is quite the way to put it, Becky. But it is what it is, because these are the ends justifying the means. But man, can you get into some tricky territory when you're a cult leader like Tim Ballard is, or you have the opportunity to become one within Mormonism? Like, that is not a healthy attitude. I think that we should be forwarding Mormons, is it?
Yeah, That scripture and that theme in the Book of Mormon, so let's just analyze that for a second. Laban was the gatekeeper of these records that Nephi and his brothers wanted. Well, Laban was standing in the way of their efforts to obtain those, and so God said that it's justifiable to behead him because he's in the way. Like, putting aside the fact that Laban was drunk and that he was passed out, and Nephi could have taken his clothes and gone and gotten the plates, done everything he could do. He didn't need to behead him in order to accomplish that. But setting that aside, the message of that is that it's a righteous thing to do if somebody is standing in the way of Nephi's righteous endeavor of getting those plates. And I've heard Tim quote this scripture, and he believes it, and he uses this as some of his mantra. So it is justifiable to commit violence against somebody that stands in the way of God's righteous purposes. Tim is using that, and he is claiming that his righteous purpose, his God-mandated purpose, is to save kids. And so anybody that stands in his way is a Laban in his mind. And he's signaling to his religious fanatics that the women who are standing in Tim's way of rescuing kids are the Labans of today's world. And that's what Becky's also referring to. And so they're justifying political violence against anybody that stands in their way. And that is a really scary proposition. And really, this is like one of the things, I don't want to insert my personal story into this whole saga, but it's one of the things that convinced me that the Book of Mormon is not a Christian text, because justification of beheading Laban, Christ coming down and wiping out all the wicked people, killing them off prior to his appearance, those things are extreme acts of extremism, getting back to our original quote with Elder Oaks, of extreme political violence, of extreme religious violence, I should say, against people that don't believe what they are supposed to believe and are standing in the way of the righteous crusade, whatever it is. And so that Tim has taken to that to heart. And it's ultimately an anti-Christian message, if I could put that out there, because Christ came, and his doctrine and his teachings were, if somebody slaps you on the cheek, turn to them the other one. If they take your cloak, if they take something from you, give something else to them. Act unto others as you would have done unto you. It's a message of compassion and of forgiveness and of empathy towards your enemies. The message in the Book of Mormon that is highlighted in this story with Laban and with the coming of Christ is one of vengeance and killing and violence and murder if somebody is standing in the way of whatever righteous crusade you're on. So that's a scary proposition, because Tim believes that he's on a righteous crusade from God, and it's an absolute justification for committing religious violence against people standing in his way, and his followers take that message to heart. And I think it's a scary proposition, because it wouldn't shock me at all if Tim ended up committing religious violence against his accusers or against those that opposed him, because in his mind, religiously, according to how he reads and how these people read the Book of Mormon, it's all justified. And it's along the same line of Islamist extremists that run into a crowded mall wearing a suicide vest. It's the same justification. And it's something that I adamantly reject. And I think everybody that claims to be Christian and a believer and follower of Jesus Christ should also reject. And so to see these kind of teachings and these kind of messages crop up in these Mormon chat sessions and these Mormon comments is really disturbing and concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. And great comment. And it goes back to one of my favorite quotes of Tim that we haven't heard Tim. This is the first podcast we've ever done in 2 years where I don't think we ever played a clip of Tim, where people are like, oh, I can't stand this guy. And I'm like shoving clips in people's faces. They're like, no. This has been a very Tim-free podcast today. But I have a button on my computer where I can just press play and play clips. So I always have to show this one, because Tim, early on, if you guys remember, Meg Conley was one of the very first people to call out Tim in an article about what it was like going on an operation with him. And Meg was actually in my ward. I know Meg personally, and she's a sweetheart. And Tim was doing a response to her and different critics from just a couple of years ago. And his go-to line has always been, well, how do you know what kind of rescue kids need? And when he sets himself up as the expert, which if we haven't debunked already, he was pushing papers at the CIA. John Lyons, his boss at Operation Underground Railroad, we were at a 6-hour deposition of John Lyons, raking him over the coals for being such an incompetent person within the federal agencies that he worked with Tim under. And then desperately asking John Lyons to come and clean things up at OUR, and then seeing that Tim does not know how to run a professional operation, whether as part of a government organization, but definitely not when he has mass amounts of cash and a spiritual mantle to fulfill. So it's a shit show from top to bottom. But he acts like he has this, not just this mantle from God, this authority to act things out. He says that he has the background in the CIA, and he always goes into, well, how dare you criticize me because...
Anyone listening, how dare you or anybody dictate to a child, because it's easier to, you're not going to hurt me, to a child, you're going to tell that child what kind of rescue they need. And if it doesn't fit into the worldview that you have, then I guess they're better off not being rescued.
It's a very similar thought process as, how dare you know how Nephi should have gotten the plates? How dare you? I guess the plates and the Book of Mormon and the restoration shouldn't have happened, according to you, because Nephi, he knows how to get the plates from Laban. And you can use this example for just about anything in Mormon history.
Yeah.
How do you know what the place is? Brigham Young did. He knew that it was the place where the Timpanogos tribe was already living. How do you know how we're supposed to rebuild Zion? Do you have the inside knowledge on that? So I guess Zion would be better off not existing because you want the Timpanogos tribe to not be slaughtered and genocided. I guess that's what you want. You can use this example for anything. It's the worst, most disgusting, morally bankrupt version of logic that puts Tim at the center of knowing what's right and wrong. And that is not what the Timmy Did What podcast is for, if you have been able to tell already. So gross.
Yeah.
Come on, Tim.
And if I could just insert one more comment, like we've been pretty critical of members of the church who haven't come to the realization that Tim is a monster or are willing to even consider it until he attacked their sacred cow, you know, the leaders of the church and stuff. And I understand that, but that's not representative of all of them. It's a lot of them. But there are active members of the church who did come forward in the early days, you know, that had a clear vision of right and wrong in this, and came forward and denounced him. I mean, we've talked about some of them, like Jimmy Rex and Eric Mustos, and you know, Krista Casey, obviously, and some of the women that were or are members of the church that have come forward. I don't want to paint wide brush that this is the reaction for everybody, that they will not support female victims. However, with the church coming out and denouncing Tim, they only did that after it was apparent they were going to be exposed in the Vice News reporting,
right?
And they did it on a PR level, but not on a moral level. And they aren't here to support the women. Unfortunately, I've been so devastated and sad that they would not support the women out of a moral obligation, because they built Tim up and they need to help his victims. And it's a PR statement, and haven't done anything that I'm aware of to actually help the victims of Tim Ballard, or help encourage law enforcement to file charges, or actually encourage witnesses and members of their church to come forward. The church is a reaction. While I'm thankful for their denouncement of Tim Ballard, they can do so much more. And while
Yeah.
I'm really thankful for all the members of the church that have come to a realization of who he is in these comment sections with Greg Madsen's video, I'm thankful for them to come to a realization, but it's really a couple of years too late. Like, where were the members of the church when the women came forward? That, again, the point I'm trying to make is that 5 or 6 women coming forward alleging crimes against them by this man is not enough, apparently, to have their claims be taken seriously, for law enforcement to take them seriously, and for the public to believe them. That is the tragedy in all this, and that just a kick in the gut to our society, and that's got to
Yeah.
change. We got to change that somehow. I don't know what to do about it, but it's got to change.
Yeah, I think there's a sensationalism that we're all addicted to, and that I am, again, with this reality that's just broken through of what's really going on in our society globally and all the echelons of government and corporations and things. It just seems that there is a profit motive for people to be sensational. And as an ex-Mormon podcaster, I'm telling you guys right now, I had to set up a nonprofit a few years ago just so that I could take more donations, because I know that in my heart of hearts, the type of content that I'm interested in making is not going to be the most sensational, the most clickable to the widest audience, that will just straight up get me the views. And I'm grateful for other podcasters who do those things in their way. But for me and my core values and what I want to spend my time thinking about and saying, I want to be the nuance hoe. I want to share different perspectives, and I want to say things authentically from what I really care about and what matters. And that's not always very profitable. So speaking just as, somebody who has a couple, 1,000 followers across my platforms, speaking as myself, I know the difference when you can be sensational, you can be dogmatic, you can ignite anger. I know the playbook of how to make a viral video and how to make something, for whatever sensationalized things that I've said in the past, I'm always learning and growing and nuancing my way through it. But it just goes to show the incentive motive that people have with our attention span, and where you put your attention. It's its own kind of micro ritual that leads into what you pay attention to, what you think about, who you are, who you align with, and what gets you angry, who you fight on behalf of, who you fight against because of who people tell you to fight against. So it just feels like from the very top down of our entire society, globally as well, that there's just an incentive to sensationalize over, the truth, the fixable problems of our society and our patriarchy because of the people who benefit at the top, while we're all just down here arguing over the sensationalism of it all, right? And that's I think like the core. If I had to diagnose the problem, my cure is just to not fall in line with it. If you need an enemy, let the enemy be the people who want you to hate each other and want you to not fact check things. And, this person believes the same things that I do. So I'm going to go along with the ways that they hate people and sensationalize things. And when we're talking about such a serious topic like human trafficking and sexual assault, that this commenter, Becky, is saying like, well, at least Tim Ballard, despite all of his, his quirks, as my mom would say, he started a good conversation that nobody was talking about it before, and now they are. I would disagree with that, and on many, many different angles. But if at the end of the day, Becky is not following that line of thinking through of, all right, so he got the conversation started. What are you doing with it, Becky? Let's say he got the conversation going about human sex trafficking. Now what are we doing? When there are people in our country that need to resign from their positions of power because they're implicated in human trafficking? What was all of this for? Let's say Tim Ballard is innocent as the day is long, and he just brought all these films to the front of the conversation across the country. And now we are at a crux of who we're going to decide as a nation and each individual. What are you advocating for? Like, what are you doing with your knowledge of sex trafficking now? Do you stand with the victims? Do you tell Pam Bondi to resign? Do you tell her, hey, look around at those victims instead of talking about the freaking Dow? Whose authority are you going to uphold? And what did all of this education about sex trafficking do if it's just upholding the patriarchy and the system in which that procured the women and put these victims into the positions that they're in right now, having to fight for justice, right? Like, what the hell was all of this education for if you're not doing a goddamn thing about it now? That's my piece on that. And there's another comment I wanted to read is, thanks, Limbo Dumbo said, or step out of the way if you're not really doing rescues. And again, that goes to the sensationalized thing, that the way that Tim has done rescues has been extremely fraudulent, but also sensationalized version of shock and awe and horror. And to be honest, people don't notice how much he is stigmatizing, stereotyping, and just straight up lying about brown people, the border crisis. And this is not to get political, but if you look at where Tim Ballard puts his efforts, he is sensationalizing and throwing red meat to an already very anti-brown people base. That people are coming into our country to take our jobs, to rape our women. And Tim is just another piece of the puzzle of putting those brown people back in their place. You know, it's throwing red meat to a base that wants that narrative and that story to be retold and reaffirmed to them. And you can be for a closed border. You can be for all of the helpful immigration policies, but you can also do it without the sensationalism, because again, that's what drives clicks. That's what gets people angry. That's what gets people engaged. He's a shock jock. He's a content creator at the end of the day who doesn't have any moral standing. And if you really care about sex trafficking, you would look at the experts. I've done many podcasts in the past before that I feel like I'm beating a dead horse when I even bring it up, but quote after quote, people after people, from the beginning of The Sound of Freedom coming out, the right-wing media so desperately wanted to act like there's a leftist narrative that people are trying to suppress this movie. That, you know, it's honestly like when you hear of a fake hate crime happening that is either perpetrated by a leftist or a right-winger. People do fake hate crimes all the time because they want to be seen as the victims that are being picked on and to tell a bigger, wider story about the suppression that's going on, right? And the narrative from The Sound of Freedom from the get-go is that, and Tim still talks about this, that the theaters were empty, it was being suppressed, and that we still sold 300 million tickets to it, but people were trying to get it shut down. It sat on the shelves for 5 years. Nobody wanted to release it because it was just, you know, I guarantee that if that was a Sound of Freedom movie about Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates and Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, yeah, I can see how that would have a little bit tougher time getting out to the movie theaters. But it's a story about people that are already stigmatized and stereotyped, which are foreigners, which are brown people, which are, you know, the cartels, the drug lords, all of these things that happen in foreign countries that we have to protect our innocent virginal women from, you know. That whole narrative just sells so well. So don't give me the fucking speech, Tim, that The Sound of Freedom was so difficult and was trying to be suppressed by leftists. No, the only people who came out against it were sex trafficking experts. There were articles and all kinds of interviews given of people saying, okay, he's talking about the subject that I've dedicated my life to, and we have our ways of dealing with sex trafficking and educating people about how women and children actually get into this horrifying, devastating hellscape. It's through, you know, lack of access to drug rehab programs. It's lack of this and that within our social programs. And Tim has to go the spiritual route. He has to go the most dogmatic, red meat to his base throwing route that doesn't actually serve victims. It's a sensationalist point of view to drum up fame and more fear mongering from a base that loves to be in constant fear, to be honest. And I know I have people of the right wing who listen to this podcast, and I know what I'm saying could sound kind of offensive here, but I can call out my own side. I hope you can call it your own, that there is a 24-hour news network and others who they are truly not interested in caring about sex trafficking any more than the left-wing networks are. You know, it's not an issue of right versus left. It's about top versus bottom. And my issue with everything coming out with Epstein and the cover-ups and going to war and the DOJ. It's not a left versus right, it's a top versus bottom, because there are thousands of people in government that could be speaking up from the left and the right, and they're not, because it's an institutional problem. It is literally what is at the center of the Tootsie Pop when you crack it open is institutional control, whether it's the Mormon Church or our governments or corporations or institutions of higher learning. If you crack it open at the center, it is protection, it is money, it is power, it is influence. And Tim is just a person who created a brand and made a branding deal with, the right-wing podcasters, the right-wing news influencers, and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And he told a story that they were excited for him to tell, up until he was so emboldened that being brand affiliated was no longer useful. It's about the X's and not the X's. It's about the numbers. It's about the checkbook, and it's about who can help them share the stories that they want to share. Send out the propaganda to the base that they want to send it out. So for all of those reasons and more, no, it's what Becky said. The ends do not justify the means. We have a big problem in our country, and Tim Ballard did not do one iota at helping cure the sickness and the disease that has infiltrated our society and government. And rant.
Well said. Well said. Should we end there with that rant?
Yeah.
I think we've covered where we're at. Things.
We've covered more than I ever expected us to do. Well, all right, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast and preparing these comments. And thank you for being just such a righteous, awesome dude who has endured the wrath of Tim Ballard and so many others as you get these messages out there, supporting the women, supporting the victims, and making sure that Tim knows that we are coming for him day and night and are not giving up the fight. And we'll shine a light, and it'll be bright, and various other rhymes I could make. Ryan, you're the best. Everyone leave a thumbs up for Ryan. Like this video if you can. Like I said, so grateful for Ryan. I've hired him to work with me on many podcasts, and it would mean the world to plant that seed and see a wellspring of people who want to support this podcast and give some financial donations. And I run my podcast a little bit different around here. I can't just rely on YouTube ads or partnerships with brands like normal influencers, because instead of going on to a different website, like, what's his name? All right, skip this part. Point is, donations are important. And I'm trying to create even more content, but it causes me a lot of anxiety knowing that I have to create it from a very vulnerable, authentic place that is true to me, but not always the most popular. And so if you like what I'm putting down and you think my voice is important and what Ryan has to say and the messages we share are important, recurring donations from our Patreon are great, donor box, and Venmo. Of course, you can listen to the Timmy Did What podcast wherever you get your podcasts, whether on Apple, Spotify, what have you. Just leaving a comment. We love to read your comments, and that does great things for the algorithm. I am Kara Burrell, the nuancehoe, and you can follow me. I have a link tree down in the comments if you want to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Substack. Also follow Ryan on Substack, so Ryan can keep putting out some good stuff. If you want to write into the show, you can write me an email at thenuancehoe@gmail.com. And we are going to be pumping out lots of content. I hope that you guys appreciate it. And I appreciate each one of you for being in this live stream. Thank you guys so much for the super chats. It really does make all the difference knowing that this time we take to do this is well worth it. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you aren't already. And let's make sure that Timmy knows that he's going down. All right, let's do another episode of Dead